My favourite knockout in my career was because of how controlled it was from the start to the finish. Duane Ludwig, one of my favourite fighters to watch. He was credited for having the fastest knockout in the UFC. Jonathan Goulet came crashing across the octagon and Duane Ludwig just popped him on the chin, knocked him out cold with a short right hand. As soon as the fight happened, I knew that that right hand was in his arsenal, and I walked onto it. My game plan was to prey on that right hand. I wanted him to pull that right hand away from his chin, so there was a gap here for me to hit my left hook. I didn't intend on getting hit with the right hand, but because I did, it gave him the confidence to lean more into that technique. I throw the jab again as a feint. He pulls his right hand to counter and I come around the side to catch him.
When it's been difficult, what's the mindset?
The thing that stifles people is their anxiety. People make decisions out of fear and they're almost always bad decisions. But you can't let that doubt run wild. I don't like that feeling of being vulnerable. The first time I saw MMA, I was like, man, that's scary. I don't think I can do that. As soon as I'd said in my head, I don't think I can do that, I had to then do it. I always say to fighters, look, if the fight's making you anxious, you've got to live it every day. You've got to put yourself in that uncomfortable place to the point where it becomes familiar to you.
Welcome back to the Mulligan Brothers interviews, and today I get to sit down with MMA legend Dan Hardy. Now, I've known about Dan for years because we've seen his rise through the UFC, some of the best commentating in the sport, but also he is a hometown hero from here in Nottingham. So I was super excited to go out and do this interview with him. Today's video, as always, is supported by you guys. Thank you so much to our Patreon community where you can get exclusive content with the link down below, behind the scenes, extended interviews, exclusive interviews, and there's also free trials right now if you click that link. Also, today's sponsor, Marek Health, I'll speak about them a little bit later on in the video. Over the years, we've interviewed with many people from the fight game, from MMA, boxing to Muay Thai and beyond. And this was one of the most interesting conversations about the in-depth thoughts and visualization that a fighter has to go through to get into a fight. This is one of my favorite episodes, especially the end of the episode. So stay tuned. Checking over our YouTube analytics over the last few years, most of you guys aren't subscribed. So if you aren't subscribed, please hit the subscribe button. I'm having a competition with my brother Luke at the moment, who is running Mulligan Brothers Motivation, and we're racing to 1 million subs, and I think we can beat him by the end of the year. So please subscribe down below. Let's dive into this amazing episode with Dan Hardy. Usually what we start is just for a soundbite, is just to introduce yourself by name and what you do.
My name's Dan Hardy, and what do I do? I was a fighter, and I'm matching signed fighters now, and yeah, just kind of live martial arts.
So the way we're able to do this is we have a really good Patreon community who support us to do it. So that usually we'll give them the first question. So we had a few different questions come through. The one that I was interested in, so I've picked one that I liked is, and I did this in research. You was on the Joe Rogan 12 years ago. Wow. Yeah. The first time, and it looks completely different. I just wanted to ask you what your experience was the first time, and where podcasting was. This is a little bit of a left field question, but where podcasting was at that time, now to know where the Joe Rogan experience is.
Yeah, it's odd to think back, to be honest, because it was, the good thing is I trained with Joe, you know what I mean? So like we knew each other on the mats before we'd sat in a podcast studio. So I felt quite comfortable, but at the same time, it's Joe Rogan's podcast and it was already pretty massive at the time. I mean, obviously it's a different beast entirely now, but it was just a great conversation. I always knew that Joe Rogan, because I listened to so many of his podcasts, he would always draw a good conversation out of somebody. And I was at a particular point in my life where, I'd just come back from Peru, and, a few things in my life had been shifting and changing around. And I was just in the right space to have a good conversation. And Joe's one of the best for that. So it was just a great experience, Always is hanging out with Joe, whether the camera's rolling or not.
The funny thing, the conversation itself was absolutely, it was like you was talking about like ayahuasca, medicines, like there's tons of different things you're talking about. But one of the interesting perspectives was 12 years ago, you both were talking about like Oprah Winfrey and saying like how interesting how difficult it must be to be that famous and what happens, and that perspective now looking at where he is right now is wild. Like it's such I'm guessing you've not watched it back.
I haven't, to be honest. No, I mean, I don't watch a great deal of my own stuff back. I remember it though, and obviously I remember the second time I went on there as well, which was a little bit more. That was a bit more of a Joe Rogan conversation where it was a bit kind of all over the place, talking about stuff growing out of insects' heads and stuff. You know what I mean? But like the first one, particularly, I still have people coming up to me and talking about it. I don't know. I just think sometimes, and I think that's probably why, these kind of conversations, I always feel like woke up this morning, just feel a little bit anxious because I've got no idea what's going to happen with the conversation, and anxious in an excited way because I often hear myself say something that I learned from, you know what I mean? Because I'm like, oh, I've not thought about that before. And I think that's the best thing about Joe. He's able to kind of, and obviously your guys' work as well, you're able to kind of pry information out of people that they may not have heard themselves say before, So like to be able to put all the ayahuasca experiences into perspective within a conversation with Joe was really good as well. And like I said, I have so much feedback on it. I've had so many people. In fact, the second time I went to Peru was very, very strange. There was a kid out there that was there because of the first Joe Rogan podcast. And what was funny is he didn't recognize me when I first got there because he'd listened to it audio. Wasn't really an MMA fan. So, he'd listened to this podcast and felt like ayahuasca might be his final solution to get himself to a good place in his life. And he showed up to Peru at this particular time and he was there for a month, I think. And after a week or so, I kind of got talking to him because he was having a really real hard problem, a real tough time integrating with the group, based on some of the personal things he was dealing with. And when it turned out that he was there because he'd heard this podcast, this Joe Rogan podcast, and it turned out to be my podcast with him, it was weirdly serendipitous. And I think, I mean, to be honest, just that alone kind of made him feel like, oh, hang on a minute, something's happening here, So, I mean, that was a positive story that came out of it for somebody else. He ended up like moving to New York and getting in stand-up comedy and stuff, and it ended up being a real good story, which was not. I mean, I went there for myself, if I'm honest, but then that was probably the best medicine that came out the second trip.
Wow, it's interesting listening to the conversation. I think last year, myself and Neve were doing a lot of interviews, and this, the plant medicines, ayahuasca came up quite a lot, and it was something I was really interested in. Listening to that podcast last night kind of re-sparked that. Look, I think this last year I did like this, I did a run, like it was more like a pilgrimage it was a 408-mile run. And I feel like I got what I needed, that I was trying to go with the intentions to go to the trip with. So maybe we'll touch on it a little bit because I still think it's super interesting and probably something I'll touch on at some point. I'd love to document it and all that kind of stuff. So we'll touch on it at some point. There you go, Patreon guys. So something that I don't usually get is we do a lot of interviews in the US. So I'm always like really inquisitive, like where did you grow up? What was that like, from a US perspective? And we grew up in the same city of Nottingham, which is a first, I think. Is that a first? No, we've had one more interview in Nottingham. But how would you describe it to the US audience? What was it like growing up in Nottingham? What was that childhood experience like?
In hindsight, it was awesome. I feel very, very fortunate, but that's probably because now I've traveled the world a bit and I've met a lot of people that didn't have a childhood in Nottingham with cool parents that like cool music, and you know what I mean? Obviously, I can look back as a child and I can see the different things that were a challenge at the time, things that made childhood challenging. Mainly other people was obviously, I think that's what most people would say is other people with a problem when they were a kid, whether it's parents or people at school or whatever. But my home unit was, although my parents were very young, I mean, they were 17 when I was born. So I went to their wedding when I was 3. And they're still together now and they're still awesome. And they're both very, very different people. And I was very fortunate to have had them around me and to kind of grow up with them a little bit as well. If I think back to when I was 17 and think my mum and dad were 17 and they had me, I can picture how much I've changed. And then I can also put that into their context and see how much they've changed as people. The one thing that I was always very grateful of was the music that I had around me when I was a kid. You know, I mean, I obviously grew up with the Beatles playing all the time. My mum is a huge Fleetwood Mac fan. My dad was Sex Pistols and The Clash. We went to see a Specials cover band last week. You know what I mean? He's like, I have a Specials tattoo. You know, like a lot of my childhood had a good soundtrack to it, and I think that helped. And then that kind of moved into my own taste of music when I was sort of 12, 13. I started to listen to more like heavy metal, and you know, some of the stuff that my dad was listening to, punk still, but that was my dad's music, and I kind of wanted my own. And so like I got really into heavy metal and hardcore, and then that linked me with a group of friends they were older than me. They were all going out drinking and going to clubs and stuff. So I kind of got into that rock city scene when I was about 14 or 15, you know, which was awesome. I mean, I had a lot of good friends and we had a lot of wild times, you know, and there was a lot of fist fighting, which was, you know, good and bad. You know, it was fun at the time, but it was probably not the best use of the skills that I was also developing alongside the heavy metal and the partying. So, I mean, you know, anytime I look back at my childhood, I just always feel thankful. I always feel thankful that, I mean, first of all, I didn't have a phone in my hand all the time. That is something that I really like. That is really prevalent in my mind all the time, especially because like I have like my sister's just had a little boy, and like he's going to grow up with the internet around him all the time. He already knows how to work a phone, I'm sure, better than, you know, my grandparents. And you know, I had like, you know, football and bikes and ice poles from the corner shop, and you know what I mean, and like mixtapes and that kind of stuff, and that was all awesome. And it's like, I guess in the context of how the world is now, I can look back and say, man, I'm glad I was born in that time. And I always thought Nottingham was cool as well. Like, we had a castle, we had Robin Hood, you know, like I could go anywhere in the world and say Robin Hood, and everyone's like, oh, I didn't know that. I'm in Sri Lanka, like, you know, Robin Hood. I'm in America, like Robin Hood. And so that was always cool as well. I kind of felt like my city was legendary because of that. You know, Sherwood Forest's a real place. People's jaws drop open when you say that. Like, the Major Oak's a real thing. Like, you know, so I look back with a lot of gratitude. And again, for the people around me, for my family, you know, my mum and dad, my grandparents, you know, my sister's awesome. So, yeah. I have no real complaints about it. I guess most of the time I was the anomaly in the room. I was a quiet kid. So I think, you know, I think anything that was potentially challenging for me was not as challenging for other people around me at times, you know.
Could you speak to that experience? Like, I'm guessing, you know, you listen to that kind of music, having some like creative, you know, this creativity as a kid, like a different kind of thinking, leads to, you know, other people thinking you're a bit of an outcast. Or did you have that experience then?
Yeah. I mean, that was, I guess that was probably the most challenging part of growing up, because I was, you know, I was always a quiet kid. I didn't really integrate too much. I tended to have one good friend, and that person would be there. They were my best friend, and then, you know, everyone else was kind of there, but I would either be with that person or I'd be in my own world a little bit. And I think, you know, that also kind of played into like team sports. Like, I tried football, didn't really like football. My dad was a great football player, and I just couldn't get into it. I was never any good at it. Rugby was cool because of the physical contact, but then I had to rely on other people to pull their own weight, and I didn't like that. So like, I can see that's why I kind of ended up going towards an individual sport. But at the same time, like, I always remember looking back at myself as a kid and just being in my own Lego world, right? Lego and pirates and dinosaurs, and I could obsess about something for a week and then move on to something else and obsess about that for a week, and you know what I mean. So and I'm still very much like that now. That's why I kind of drift between this room, obviously, which is the gym, and then the studio next door, because like I've got everything I need here. You know, I've got a ton of books around the house. I've got the internet now, which is, you know, I can bring the world to me. So you know what I mean? It's like I'm still, and you can see that in the house as well. I'm sure you guys have seen it as you're walking around. It's still very much a childish house. You know, like there's a Ninja Turtle on the shelf, for example, over there. You know, and I'm glad I've never lost that. You know, and that's partly down to my mum as well. She was always encouraging of, you know, be a kid, have fun.
Yeah, I mean, I see it. It's kind of like my dream house. Like it is. It's like a little bit like, I guess, an expression of your mind in a building. Like it's really freaking cool space.
You remember the movie Big, don't you?
Big. Tom Hanks. Yeah.
That, I mean, I always say that when people come into the house, especially if they're from a similar generation, I say, well, you remember the movie Big, right? He was a kid that all of a sudden became an adult. And I remember standing in front of the wall of Lego at Toys R Us when I was 10, thinking to myself, when I'm 25, I'm having all of this.
Yeah.
And some people, obviously a lot of people, unfortunately, they grow out of that, but yeah, I don't think I ever did.
I've just bought a house last year, and it was done really nicely, very adult, and I just put in a projector screen that covers my whole bedroom wall. It looks ridiculous, but I love films. Like, I love watching movies. And even my son was like, Daddy, why you got two TVs? Like, there's a TV on the wall, why is there a projector? My girlfriend hates it, but it genuinely has been the most joy I've had in my life for like the last, few months. Like, just being able to have a big cinema screen there, it's exactly what I would have wanted as a kid. So yeah, I'm trying to bend into it more. But this is like walking around here, I think we've all been like, yo, this is like the dream. Like, it's incredible. Okay, so childhood, I mean, similar kind of thing to us as well. I think we were kind of the last generation of no internet, no phones. I think we started to get like your Nokias and all that kind of stuff, but going out playing in the park and having all that experiences. I hope my son doesn't, maybe they'll look back and they'll have fond memories of their childhood too, but trying to keep him away from the iPad and the phone is like important, because I don't think they will.
Yeah.
It's not the same as going out into the woods and exploring and stuff.
Our generation's pulling away from it though.
Yeah.
Like, you can see it. Like, even like, especially fighters who have, they've left their career with a bit of money in their pocket. Most of them buy a piece of land and disappear. And I'm always doing it. Like, as soon as I heard building work outside yesterday, I'm looking at property in Scotland. Do you know what I mean? Like, get me away from people, get me space and trees and land and like freedom. Yeah. And I feel almost like that's our childhood before the internet haunting us a little bit. Like, this was way more close to how you should be living. Because I feel myself pulled back. Like, I feel myself thinking about, well, I should be growing vegetables and keeping chickens and. You know what I mean? And that's like before my grandparents' generation. But I certainly feel like I'm being pulled back to it, and I know a lot of people are.
No, I think you're right. We were just in Czech Republic with Yuri.
Yuri Prohaska.
Yeah, and he's living in a cabin in the woods.
Perfect example.
A lot of the Stoltmans, the strongmen I was talking about earlier, like they're up in the Highlands, and they've got the houses and whenever we've been anywhere, they're the ones we're like, oh, this is the life. Like, this is where I want to be right now. Just kind of, in your own space, thinking, having some kind of presence and like awareness and just.
There was a comedian I was listening to the other day, and he was talking about, and again, similar, like a kind of like my generation. And he was talking about being present. And he's like, but like, that's a thing now. That's like a fashionable thing. Like, people make an effort to be present. Like you had to be present when I was a kid. Like, sitting on a bus, I'm either reading, I'm listening to music, or I'm sitting at a bus stop. How many hours did I spend sitting at a bus stop without a phone in my hand?
Crazy.
Like, you have to be present.
Yeah. It doesn't. Nothing. You can't. There's not that like scroll, that instant gratification that I think people think they're getting something from, but that will be the blur of your memory. Like, you don't remember that.
Yeah.
But you're right. Yeah, I can remember sitting at a bus stop for hours, just being like, I'm bored of shit right now, but I'm here. Like, and you remember that. Yeah. Whereas like that time, even now, and I'm guilty for it, being on socials and stuff, like, I don't remember any of those moments. Like, there's not one time like I remember the exact meme I was laughing at or whatever it was. Like, it wasn't a fond memory of mine.
No.
Now looking back, reading that book or sat there at the bus stop in the rain, like, it is somewhat of a fond memory. Like, that's crazy.
It's almost how we relate to each other though. Like, I can listen to conversations, and I listen to myself sometimes. I'm like, oh, did you see that thing on Instagram? Oh, I saw that video on, like, that the video of that comedian. No doubt I saw that while I was doom scrolling.
Yeah.
But then there is positivity. I see that my friend Kyle was moved out onto land in Texas or wherever, and he's, rescued animals and stuff. So there is a positivity that trickles through that stream, but you've got to craft that stream. I've started to no interest. I've started to select things I don't want to see. Yeah. But it's a challenge for the new generations that I feel like I've got a head start on, because I started without it.
I think personally you have to find like real life and living. Like you have to go out there and live your life. You have to explore, hike, whatever it is that you fancy, but go out there and do it. And that, yeah, you're right. Like there is positivity in it. There is definitely positivity in it, but it's such a grey area. Then you can, like you say, doom scroll, and you can just fade into that abyss so easily. Like that's what it's designed to do, is to make you do that. So to use it for positive is quite a hard skill, which is wild.
That's hacking the system.
Yeah, exactly. When did you find combat sport? Like when was the first? Do you remember the first thing? Was it like a movie you saw, or was it a class you went to, or something?
It was the Ninja Turtles. And that's why Raphael's sitting over there. That's a gift from a friend of mine. Yeah, I mean, like as a kid, like the Ninja Turtles were like all of a sudden, like they hit the scene, like, and it was nothing I'd ever seen before. You know, I like the fact that they were all very similar, but they had their own slight differences, personalities. Like I like the fact they had different weapons. Like I loved Michelangelo and the nunchaku. I've got sets hanging up behind me over there on the rig. But it was the fun and the liveliness of it. I didn't necessarily connect it to a real thing of martial arts, you know. I guess the first connection was when we were playing Ninja Turtles, and I had a couple of friends who did Taekwondo, and they were pretty good. And obviously they're kicking and doing all fancy stuff, and I'm like, you know, all over the place. And so my mom decided she was going to take me to one of their classes and actually see if I would take to it, because, you know, I had a lot of energy for it, and usually I would be on my own playing. So like the idea of putting me into something where there were other kids was definitely a good idea. And I mean, that was my first introduction. Unfortunately, my first few years were just very unpleasant. It was not an experience I would like anybody to have in martial arts, really, because it was just, especially martial arts back in the day, and this is, I guess, one of the benefits of the emergence of MMA, is that a lot of the bullies in martial arts have found their way out. Whereas back in those days, a lot of the instructors were bullies, and a lot of them wanted to walk around with the big beer gut hanging over the black belt like they were some kind of supernatural being. And again, that's probably one of the reasons why I gravitate towards the realism of martial arts, because like I want to call these people's bluffs a little bit, you know. But yeah, so like my first couple of instructors, the first person just yelled at me. I was just being a kid, just excited about being there, and he yelled at me and threw me out. And then I had another instructor that was just a horrible bully for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years. And that was his own drama going on, but it made my experience of martial arts very unpleasant, which was unfortunate because I did love it, and my parents were proud of me for going, so I didn't want to stop. You know what I mean? So I ended up kind of working through that phase, and my school was divided into two. It was Eagle and Hawk, and Eagle was a guy called Mick Rowley, who was a younger instructor who just loved martial arts, and then the other guy was Hawk, who just wasn't a pleasant person, and he taught all the kids. So when I came to a point where I was old enough to start training with Mick Rowley, all of a sudden it was like, oh my goodness, this is what I've been waiting for all along. And he was obsessed in an excited way. He's like, watch this Jackie Chan movie, play with this weapon, try this technique, see how high you can jump, see how far you can reach. You know, like it was just, everything was like an excited challenge. How many chairs can we jump over? How hard can you kick this bag? You know, and it was, he kept my attention for years. I mean, I got my black belt under him when I was 17, and he taught my grandfather as well between 60 and 65. You know, some days it was just him and me and my grandfather in the class, you know what I mean? So he spent a lot of time working on me. And again, you know, another person that was just such a positive anchor in my young life that stayed with me all the way into, you know, pretty much my pro career. And then came and watched my fights after, you know, when I was fighting in Nottingham and that kind of thing. So, you know, a bit of a balance of you know, some negativity and some positivity, but majority positive. And, you know, martial arts, especially for young people, is amazing. I just think that the parents need to go and sit in the class and watch, and just be certain that that's the right person to be teaching, because there's a lot of charlatans out there.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. My son started doing Aikido, and it was, I don't want to call people out, but it was that kind of, big or over the black belt, speaking to like 5 and 6 year olds, like, and there's a balance, because you're trying to teach discipline, but at the same time, you got to do it in the right way. And I think it's so important. I found basketball quite young, and my coach was like my biggest mentor, and he was tough. He was really tough, but at the same time, throughout my life, like, he's probably the one who like worked on my mindset in the best way. But he had a very passionate approach because he loved the sport, whereas I think the guy who was coaching my son, he only went for a few sessions because I was like, no, this isn't the guy for you, was passionate about the power, over, I'm guessing, from 12 years and younger, which is kind of crazy. But yeah, if you find the right person, it's really amazing. I think you're right. Yeah, if you're a parent, you got to attend those classes, whether it's whatever sport it is, and make sure they're with the right people. Was there a moment that stands out in those early days that, outside of finding, that new teacher, where you was like, this is it? Was it like a particular, maybe your first fight, a win, or something where you're like, this is the moment now? Like, I know I want to do this for the rest of my life.
I don't know if there was one particular moment. What I would say is there were a lot of moments that could have stopped me going back. I can like that's like, I remember my first competition was in Nottingham at Harvey Haddon Stadium, which was weird because then when I was fighting for Cage Warriors World titles, I was in the same venue, and I did my first grading in that place, and so there was a lot of weird emotions attached to that particular building. But mainly because the first competition, I was 7, and I have a very kind of foggy memory of being face down on the mats and being able to hear my mum crying. And it was like I was in a competition against a kid that was probably a bit bigger and a bit better than me, and I got kicked in the head or something, and it was just the most terrifying and overwhelming experience ever. And I did not want to go back. Never ever did I want to compete again. So I probably had a couple of years where I didn't compete, and it was working with Mick Rowley and sparring for hours and hours that I started to realize, I want to have a go at this. I want to see if I can actually do this. But I don't think there was a particular moment where I was like, this is for me. I think maybe the first time I saw the UFC, first time I saw MMA, that I was like, oh man, that's terrifying. I've got to try that. Because it almost called my own bluff. Because when I watched it, I was like, man, that's scary. I don't think I can do that. And as soon as I'd said in my head, I don't think I can do that, I had to then do it. And I had one of the situations. I mean, I guess going to China was similar to that, but the boat race as well was that. As soon as they offered me to do a boat race from London to Brazil, the idea of being in deep sea is terrifying. As much as I always wanted to be a pirate when I was a kid, the idea of there being, thousands of feet of water beneath you, and you're 100 miles from the nearest land. You know what I mean? Like, that was terrifying. Again, that was a similar emotion. Like, I've got to do this now. Wow. I mean, I didn't make a career out of the sailing thing, but certainly with the MMA, that was my initial feeling.
What is it that is in you that hear something terrifying and thinks, right, let me go towards that?
I think it's the feeling of vulnerability. I don't like that feeling of being vulnerable, and I think that comes from being a kid. I think that comes from being in a playground with the new kid that's just come to the school that's trying to make a name for himself, and the quiet kid that's the easiest target. Do you know what I mean? And that initial feeling of vulnerability that then was bolstered by training martial arts. I mean, I guess that's really one of the reasons that kept me going. It obviously, making my parents proud because I was doing something, but at the same time, feeling like I was developing something that would look after me. Like, I mean, there was a couple of bullies in school, and, eventually those bullies came off on the worst end of a kick, and I didn't want to kick them. I wasn't excited to kick them. I kicked him and then broke down and ran away. You know what I mean? Because I didn't want to be aggressive, but like, I had something that now I could stand in between me and them. So then I guess because I had that, and going into my teens, 15, 16, 17, now all of a sudden I'm like, okay, right, I can fight now. Like, I knew I could fight because I'd been tested outside Rock City and wherever else we'd gone. But I also, I would paint my nails black, or I'd wear purple contact lenses, or I had long hair, for example. So these were all easy things that people would target me for, which I was fine with because I was always going to stand my ground. So I guess those sort of 3 years, 15, 16, 17, I'd realized my strength and was kind of basking in it a little bit as a young man, as a teenager. And people would give me that respect for the first time in my life. They're like, well, we know he can fight now, so we're just going to leave him to it. We're just not going to bother him too much. So like everything all of a sudden got a bit easier. And then I remember going to Virgin Megastore and buying UFC 2 on video and taking it to Clarendon College, where I was at art college at the time, wheeling the TV into my studio and putting that video in. And as soon as I saw that, I'm like, my goodness, there's a place where I would still feel out of my depth. And that made me feel a bit vulnerable again. And I think that's what forced me to try it.
I've been getting tons of messages asking about my health protocols ever since I did the world's heaviest marathon. The experience took a toll, and getting back to optimal health has been an absolute journey. That's where Marek Health have been absolutely essential. Their approach is beyond quick fixes. It's about long-term health and performance. They work with medical professionals to create personalized, evidence-based plans tailored to your needs, using pharmaceutical-grade treatments and cutting-edge diagnosis. Whether it's TRT, peptides, supplements, or like me, getting full health analysis to get you back on track, Marek Health provides everything that you need. And it's not just for athletes. If you're an entrepreneur or businessman like me, you might want that renewed focus, clarity, and energy. That's where Marek Health can get your brain performing at its peak. From comprehensive blood work to customized health plans, Marek gives you the tools to optimize your life. If you're ready to take control of your health, go to marekhealth.com and use code Mulligan for 10% off. The link's down below. I can't recommend them enough. And if you just wanted to get started, I would go and get your blood work done. Go get assessed, find out where they can help you. Use the link down below for 10% off using code Mulligan. Let's dive back into the video.
You grew up as a child who, faced adversity and bullies. You overcame that and understood there was power in that. So then you realized that the way to feel that feeling again is to find something difficult to do again.
I guess in my early teens, I realized that now because I could stand up for myself, a level of respect came with that, right? But that level of respect was only applied to me in the environment that I was frequenting, right? My school, my college, sixth form, like the people that knew me, right? But as soon as I was in the Market Square on a Saturday night, or I was in Rock City and some skinheads have showed up, like, they don't know that I'm a 17-year-old, black belt taekwondo that could kick them in the head. And in that space, I don't know as I can as well. You know what I mean? I'm like, I don't know as I'm going to freeze up, because these are legit, like, big men. Do you know what I mean? So it was like I kind of, it was almost like I grew into the pond that I was in. And I'm like, okay, right, I'm in this pond. Then all of a sudden I was moved into a bigger pond, and now there's skinheads and Hell's Angels floating around, and like football hooligans and like all of these different factions. And I've now gone from being like one of the guys in a very, very small pond to being an art student in a very, very different environment. So I guess that was another point where I was forced to level up, right? Because then I'm in an environment now where I do feel a bit vulnerable. I feel a bit out of my depth. I'm in amongst groups of people that, they're carrying weapons, and they will fight at the drop of a hat. Most of them will go out particularly to fight. So then I had to I trained, I rose myself to that level, I suppose. But then when I saw that these guys were getting in a cage and fighting no rules in front of crowds of people, and they were like the elitist in my mind. They were like the scariest, toughest guys on the planet. I guess, and this is me looking in hindsight and trying to figure this out. I guess I looked at those guys and realized that they would walk into any room in the world and have that respect that I wanted.
Mm.
Right?
Makes sense, yeah.
Like the same respect that I would get if I walked into the common room at school, was the same respect that they would get if they walked into any room in the world, any martial arts gym in particular. Imagine that. Like imagine being Mike Tyson walking into a boxing gym. Like that is, and again, it's not because I wanted to feel the big man. It was just a self-defense thing. It felt safe to have that presence.
No, I completely understand it. I think just from the outside perspective, any UFC guy we've been around, that's felt like, is like, this guy could kill me, like there is and it's not like a present thought, but there's a huge respect for it, like the disciplines you have to go through, the amount of, and the sheer like pain and damage you could inflict. Like, so there's a level of respect. It must be super primitive, back from thousands of years ago, seeing the biggest guy or the best warriors, you would be like, okay, he has my respect, that's it. There's nothing I can do about that, because he could kill me if he wanted to.
Yeah.
Which is, I get it.
Yeah, and again, whenever I've met people that have got that presence and that power, usually they're good people.
100%,
right?
Yeah.
Which then casts those bullies that I encountered in my early days in martial arts in a very different light, because I see them now as just being very insecure, because they had to have that presence, because they were demanding it. Whereas people that are able to command that presence don't demand it.
They don't say nothing. Yeah,
they don't need to. Right?
Very, very quite more powerful than anything, because they don't have to say anything.
Yeah. So like that's, I guess that's a big part of the reason why I followed this path. And and I still like it now. I love the fact that like I was at Pantera the other night, and I'm in a very different environment. Like no one should know who I am. I'm Pantera. They're everyone's there to see them. And there are still loads of martial arts fans there in amongst the Pantera fans. They're like, oh man, I love watching your fights and stuff. And that's warming, you know what I mean? It's I'm glad that I put myself through what I did, and I'm grateful that I have that level of appreciation from people that recognize that I did what I did. But you're right, it's like a tribal leader, you know what I mean, almost. And Veronica and I were talking about this the other day. And what's weird about all of the sports compared to combat sports is that most people don't feel like they can do other sports as well as the athletes that are doing it. But with combat sports, there are people in the crowd that have never even been taught how to make a fist that feel like they could just do it. Do you know what I mean? And it's the weirdest thing. Like I would say probably 50% of guys, men, if they felt like someone broke into their house, they could deal with it.
Yeah.
When in actuality, most of them would break their hand punching the other person in the face.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's like this weird juxtaposition with this unreasonable confidence that people have in an area where they've got no training whatsoever. But like, I'm not going to watch a tennis player and feel like I can do what they do, or a basketball player. I can't do that.
There's still some people, yeah, but but you're right, yeah.
But like, football is probably the grey area, because you have a lot of people that did play football and thought they could have been.
Do you think it is that it's tapping into that primitive, like you have to believe that you can fight to protect your family and all that kind of stuff? So that's because you're right, like an untrained person versus a mildly trained person is going to get absolutely destroyed every single time. Never mind watching from the from the arena, the most elite fighters ever. But you're right, there's a huge ego in it, like, and I guess you see it in online videos when people get found out, like on a street fight or something.
Yeah, but I mean, even now, I mean, and I would say that the industry's changed a bit, because like even now it's different. Like I remember like I would walk out an event and the fans were respectful, whereas now what you see is you'll see someone that they're streaming live on their TikTok or whatever, and they're insulting someone who's a former UFC champion as they're walking out of the cage. And it's like, now there's this disconnect where that person deserves your respect, and now they're not getting it as much. And it's I see it's way more prevalent in MMA, and I feel like way more people feel like they can fight when they actually can't. So it's almost like they look down on fighters because it's a weird thing. I've been thinking about it quite a lot recently, because it seems to be way more prevalent now than it ever has been. And I do think it's the emergence of social media.
Yeah.
Like we had an instance the other day. There's a fighter that's just been suspended for 9 months because he tried to punch a fan. But in actuality, the fan was being a prick. He was aggravating him and he was yelling abuse at him. And we had the same thing with Marab at a grappling event. He went up into the crowd to talk to somebody that was yelling abuse at him. And that it's like there's this disconnect that you're not going to get a slap.
It's interesting you say that. It was I was listening to a lecture by Jordan Peterson it was years ago, but he said something along the lines of, today you're protected by the law, you're protected by being cancelled, this kind of stuff. But 100 years ago, the thing that would define boundaries within conversations and boundaries within social structures was, if you did something wrong, you would fight. Like men would fight each other, and that would settle it. And now there's this protection against that really primal, base sort of interaction with humans. Like, yeah, people think they can scream at you and get away with it. But like, that's only changed recently, because like you say, fighters and even athletes in most sports, like if fans were yelling at them, you'd be fighting with the athletes. So there's a boundary, like I can't yell this because he might punch me in the face, but yeah, like, so I guess it's such a weird combination, like you say. It's definitely more prevalent in fight and combat.
For sure. It kind of goes back a little bit to what we were saying previously about the difference with social media and not. I mean, like, and I remember I grew up in Nottingham, obviously, in Clifton and in Silverdale, and I went to West Bridgeford Comp, and my group of friends were like all the outcasts that didn't really fit in any of the other groups. And we hung out, we played football every day, but most of the time we were fighting with each other. Like, there was a lot of like arguing and fighting, and like we weren't big enough or strong enough to really hurt each other. You know what I mean? A few lumps and bruises and stuff because we were kids. But we kind of figured out that hierarchical respect. And we also understood that like if I start talking shit to you, you might come up and slap me, right? But if I don't know, the world just feels very, very different now to what it used to. And there's a disconnect between that respect that people used to get when I was fighting compared to now. I don't like fighters generally now, even world champions, don't get the respect they deserve, I don't think. And it almost feels like other sports or other skill sets that are outside of yourself, whereas fighting, a lot of people feel like it's just innate and they were born with the skills to be able to fight, which is definitely not the case. I still question whether I can fight a lot of the time, and I've spent 30 years working on it.
Yeah. No, it's nuts, and it is the case. And I think we was in a very similar generation. Like, if you get in an argument with somebody, it will lead to a fight. I tried to explain this to my partner. She's American, and she's slightly younger than me. I think she was just on the cusp of that, that generation. And she doesn't get it. And I'm like, because they'll get in arguments in the town whilst people are drinking. I'm like, you can't do that. Like, you can't go out and have an argument with somebody in the city centre whilst you're having a drink, because there's going to be a brawl. Like, it's just going to happen. And she's like, that's not what happens. Like, what? But like, that's the generation we grew up in. Like, if you go out into the city and you want to argue with somebody, you've got to be prepared to fight. Like, otherwise, just don't get involved in something. Same in school as well. Like, if you're arguing or you're chatting rubbish about somebody, there's going to be a fight after school to settle, who's right or who's wrong, and it does create but yeah, you're right. There is no respect anymore.
I also know I'm very fortunate that I know at no point in my life is a video going to surface online of me as a 16-year-old fist fighting outside of Rock City because no one had a phone in their hand.
Yeah.
So that's another thing as well, is as soon as there's a bit of a scuffle now, there's 15 people filming it from different angles.
Yeah, you're right, yeah. Yeah.
So there's no forgiveness there, because then everyone's getting sued and arrested and stuff.
No, you're right, yeah. Because you get in a fight, when I was a kid, it was like the grainiest fight, it wasn't worth watching.
Yeah. I don't even have video of some of my professional fights. I'm definitely not going to have any street fight videos, which I'm thankful for, because, I made a beast of myself sometimes.
Yeah, I'm sure, yeah. Yeah.
Like, I quit drinking when I was 17, so I didn't keep getting into fights.
Yeah. That's interesting. No, you're right. Yeah. It's just
quit drinking when I was 17. That's a weird thing for Americans to hear.
Yeah. That's again, a lot of our family and friends, similar kind of thing. Like, so much trouble and aggro came from going out into the city centre and going for a drink. Like, it just wasn't worth it.
Yeah.
If you're a bigger lad as well, or, like you say, if you're different slightly, there is literally groups of people who are out there just to fight. Like, that's what they're there for. So they see somebody who maybe looks up for it or looks a little bit different, and that's what they're trying to find. I think we stopped, again, I think I was playing basketball at the time, but stopped drinking quite early just because it wasn't worth it anymore. Like, you don't want to go out the next day with your family and the same group of lads bumps into you or whatever, it's just not a good look.
Yeah.
You spoke about the early UFC, you're watching UFC 2. How would you describe that? Like, what does that look like in comparison to what it is today?
It looked like absolute carnage. It looked like no one was in control of it. This is how it looked, and I think this is why Big John McCarthy has maintained such a strong brand in the sport, because even in the early days when he was younger, he was a big guy with a good presence. So even when you've got like two heavyweight murderers in there, he would still have some kind of ability to control the space. But I mean, you had people like guy with one boxing glove and no glove on the other hand. You had people stuck in positions where the only thing they can punch is the other guy's groin. You had Gary Goodridge elbowing someone in the temple until he started to spasm, and they were just wild times. But it was like, I think it was that wildness that drew me to it, because that was kind of part of the fear, I suppose. Like right now, if it was organized and there's rules and referees and like it is, I don't think my adrenaline rush would have been the same as it was with those early shows. They just seemed way more chaotic. Like my first fight was on a show called Extreme Brawl, and my second fight was in a pub on a pier in Portsmouth, and it was still smoking indoors, and the smoke was gathered around shoulder height because of the low ceilings. And then I remember cornering people and getting hit with chairs, and it was just like people showing up to shows with guns. It was just a wild scene in the early days. It's way more sanitized now, and I do see that. I do see it very much more as a sport now, whereas in those early days it was like the emergence of this like outlaw fight club, and it felt very, very chaotic. Like, you just didn't know what to expect from one show to the next. You've got a sumo wrestler getting his front tooth kicked out on one show, and then a guy who's a ninjutsu practitioner who's also a police officer stepping in last minute to, you know what I mean? It was just, everything was chaos. And then obviously in like a lotus emerging from a dirty pond, you had Hoist Gracie with his beautiful white gi coming in and strangling the life out of people. And he was built a little bit like I was. So then all of a sudden, and again, that feeling of vulnerability, I guess, hit, because now I realised that there's a whole ground skill set that I didn't really have any idea about. So I had to then start working that as well.
So after seeing UFC 2, like, did you start to deliberately work towards it, or was it a little bit later on?
No, I mean, I was pretty focused that was going to be a direction I was going to go. I mean, I was already doing Muay Thai, which was pretty to the point anyway, and I liked the rawness of Muay Thai. But then with MMA, it just seemed like anything that was structural about Muay Thai was thrown out of the window. And it's like, now you can either fight or you can't, and there's nothing to protect you here. And that kind of, I mean, I remember went and bought the video. I watched it and I went and returned it because I didn't have enough money to buy another one. So I returned it to get UFC 3 and then sat and watched that. Same thing again. Adrenaline, goosebumps, like, this is crazy. I've got to try it. But then I would say probably a few months after that was when I went to China. And I had 2 months just completely immersed in traditional martial arts. Shaolin forms, Bagua forms, Singhi forms, Qigong every morning, Tai Chi every morning, weapons training. Like, we were on it 10 or 12 hours a day, But then in the evenings we were still boxing and hitting pads and stuff, because we had a few bits that we could play with that were like laying around the training space. And as much as I loved that, as much as I loved the mystical martial arts of it, and the crouching tigerness of what I was experiencing at the time, it felt a little bottomless because I still had UFC 2 and 3 playing in my mind. And I still felt like, as much as I wanted to do all of this stuff and look cool, like, if someone comes up and grabs hold of me and puts me on the floor and starts elbowing me in the head, I might not be able to do anything about it. And so a lot of that, it kind of lost its value to me in a way. Like I didn't maintain any of the stuff, any of the forms that I learned. I've got them all on video of me doing them, but I don't practice any of it anymore, you know, because I would rather spend my time doing something that's functional and will actually be beneficial. And my time now I spent training myself way more for a real fight situation than a sport fight situation, which again has changed my training slightly. But I loved my time training in China, but that was the turning point when I came back, I'm like, it's competition for me. I want to fight.
Interesting. So you had an awareness going into it that, like, you know, you could see what is true fighting at that point.
Yeah.
That's interesting, because I think most people go the opposite way. You know, you go get the China experience and it's like you come away with that and that's where you kind of stay.
Yeah. I mean, I certainly could have done. Like I was still waking up, you know, for probably 6 months or so. I still woke up every morning at 6 a.m. to do Qigong and Tai Chi. And I was still doing a lot of the stuff I did in China. I adopted a lot of the training into my regular day, but I just didn't feel like I was using my time as well if I was doing anything forms and weapons based, because it was not something I was ever going to use, you know. So it was more the discipline of the mindset that I took from it, but then everything else was about preparing for competition.
I love that. That's where I found it really interesting, is where people have taken that away from it. You know, it's the early wake-in, there's the training, you know, repetition after repetition, and you know, those kind of philosophies that I think combine that with combat sports it makes, you know, working a really good combination. When did the philosophies, the teachings, like Eastern philosophies, I've heard you mention Book of Five Rings before. When did all that sort of stuff start to seep through?
I mean, I suppose it came from a few different angles, I suppose. I mean, you know, a lot of it came through martial arts and through Bruce Lee, you know, and associated with martial arts are books of like The Art of War, Book of the Five Rings, you know. But then I also... So after art college, I went to Nottingham Trent University. I did 2 years of a 3-year course. It was a new course at the time. I was one of the first students on the course. It was contemporary art. And my initial plan was to do fine art, and it was a lot of people standing around the room painting, and I was like, it felt way more sterile than the stuff I wanted to do, whereas the contemporary artists they just seemed outlandish. Like we could do all kinds of stuff. But linked in with that, we were reading stuff by Carl Jung, Jacques Lacan, Sigmund Freud, you know, a lot of stuff. It was a lot more sitting talking than I'd expected it to be. And a lot more psychoanalysis and introspective, you know, digging into your mind and trying to figure out what your art's about, right? Because fine art's way more about the aesthetic. It's about, does it look nice, right? That's for me the difference between fine art and contemporary art. Contemporary art doesn't need to look nice. Sometimes it's intentionally not pleasant, but it says something, right? So it's not just a and I don't mean to in any way belittle fine art by saying this, but they're just two very different things, you know? Like contemporary art is anchored in philosophy, and you have to have opinions to be a contemporary artist. You have to have perspectives on things, because your art has to be about something. Like I did a lot of stuff that was about endurance art, which was something I didn't even know about when I first went to Nottingham Trent University. But I was able to connect my martial arts with my art in a variety of different ways. And one particular one that I did, I had an old canvas punch bag, like a Brian punch bag from Argos, like a real rough shit one. And it was canvas. So obviously we wear wraps and gloves to protect our hands. But the point of this was not to get a workout. It was to show the durability, but also the breaking down of the human body. So I got this beautiful white punch bag and hung it in a black studio, and I hung a piece of perspex in front of it, you know, a few feet in front of it. And then I worked out for 8 hours on the bag with no gloves or anything. And it was kind of transient. People could come in and sit and watch for a bit, and then they could leave. But I worked out for 8 hours on this bag, and I just took the skin off my knuckles. I've still got scars from it now, where just all the skin came off my knuckles. Same thing with my shins and my feet, And with this piece of Perspex, I would go and I would just, any loose fluid would just end up on this piece of Perspex. I would wipe, I would spit, I would sweat would go on it. And it just became this Jackson Pollock mess of body fluids that was just like the breaking down of this piece, this endurance piece. And I did a few things like that. And I always liked the challenge of art. You know, there were artists that would do, there was a particular Japanese artist that he spent a year outdoors, then he spent a year in a prison cell, then he spent a year tied to another artist. And like these kind of unusual styles of art really grabbed my attention. And you know, and it also kind of gave me a different perspective of what martial arts was about as well, and kind of helped me dig into that a bit more, because I was looking at it from a different perspective, from an art perspective, as opposed to from a combat sports perspective. So a kind of a long way of answering your question. I had some of the philosophical stuff came from art, and some of it came from martial arts, and a big part of it was my old teacher Mick Rowley. He was like, Bruce Lee, start with Tao Jeet Kune Do, start with Bruce Lee's books, and then go on to stuff that Bruce Lee liked, like Krishnamurti, for example. Like, I still listen to Krishnamurti now, you know, and the connection with Krishnamurti's philosophy, which was nothing to do with martial arts. It was about observing yourself, like study yourself, watch yourself. And then Bruce Lee had taken that philosophy and he'd applied it to his martial arts, and which I found fascinating. And I kind of do the same thing. You'll see the writings all on the mirrors and stuff. Like, I'm trying to break down martial arts right now, because it's chaos. It's a big mess, and people have got their own perspectives and own ideas, and some of them are right, some of them are wrong, some of them are old-fashioned and dated, and some of them are just completely outlandish and McDojo-like. But then I feel like there is a core to it, right? Like, martial arts is like mathematics. Like, no one's invented mathematics. We discover it, right? Just like science, we discover things. The way that martial arts comes together is a system that we're discovering, and we're still discovering bits. Like the calf kick's a new thing in mixed martial arts from the last sort of 10 years. Like, and there's more stuff to be discovered, but unless it's being approached in the right way, I think it's going to take us a lot longer to get there. So a big part of my brain, I guess, is cooking on that on a daily basis. And I actually find Descartes' approach to philosophy is very useful for me to use his discourse on method to look at martial arts from the same way, and try and lay the truth down, right? I think, therefore I am. That's the foundation of Descartes' work, right? Cogito ergo sum, I think it is in Latin. But what I love is that he stripped it down to the very, very bare minimum. Like, the only thing that he knows is that he's thinking. So that's how he justifies his existence. Now, if he can do that with everything in existence, then surely I can do it with martial arts, right? Surely I can strip it down to the bare truths of what it really is to fight, and then to build the technique on top of that as it's supposed to be. And I think that's probably the next phase of my life, which I feel is approaching quite quickly.
You know, it's interesting you say that. I think when you think of all the fighters through history, and athletes, and businessmen, and real, you know, forward-thinking people, they have that connection to art and philosophy. Like, it's all mixed in there and intertwined. That brings a point me and Luke were speaking about in the car is, you know, you're considered one of the best analysis, I don't know how you'd say it, analyzers of fighters. And that's just really interesting to me. Like, the way you're seeing it is completely different to, you know, your average person. When you analyze fights, like what are you looking at? Like, what is the perspective that you're coming from? Why are you considered one of the greats at doing it?
I don't know, honestly. I mean, my straightforward answer is I just spend lots and lots of time watching. Right, I spend lots of time watching, and I'm not just watching like staring at the screen and you kind of letting it, you know, feel like I'm watching one fighter and I'm putting myself in that position. I'm watching the other fighter and I'm putting myself in that position. I'm trying to feel where the pressures are in that position without being in that situation myself, right? So, and this kind of goes, like, this is where, like, Krishnamurti's philosophy kind of, you can flip it on its head, because he talks about observing oneself, right? But I could observe that person as if they're myself. And I think that's one thing that helps me get so many repetitions without actually going through it myself, is because I can be the other person. You know, I can be in that person's situation. I can imagine both sides of that fight from my own perspective. And this was entirely accidental. This was what I used to do with my own fights, because of the feeling of vulnerability and that feeling of like, oh man, like, this person might have my number. I need to be on point. I need to know everything about this person. I need to know what they expect from me and what they think of my skill set and where my skill set is weak. You know, how are they going to exploit me? So I would watch, as soon as I got a name, I would find whatever footage I could of this person. And, you know, the further into my career I got, the easier it was. So like they go, right, you're fighting this guy, right? Okay. I'm going to watch everything I can of this person, everything I can find, from their earliest fight in chronological order up to the most present day, the most recent thing I can get. Because then that gives me a perspective of not only who they are right now, but how they became that person, right? What processes they went through, what coaches they trained with, what training partners they worked with that may have like passed on skills that have been integrated into the person that I'm going to face. Because not only have I got to expect the person that I've seen, I've got to also expect something other from that person. I've got to give them the credit they're going to get better. So then I also might want to look at who they're training with currently and what they're good at, right? So I always did that from my perspective. And then I would go, okay, well, now I've watched that person and I feel like I've absorbed a part of that person's soul, right? I feel like I have a good knowledge and awareness of how that person moves, how they think, and what they're most likely to do. Then I'll go back and watch my own fights from their perspective. And I'll go, right, well, I have these skills, so how are my skills going to fit into this game, which is now outside of myself? And from that, I would often be able to develop a game plan that would it would be the antithesis of what they were expecting, because I'd already done the prior work to figure out what their expectation was. So then when I came to the end of my career, the idea of becoming an analyst was not on my radar at all. I didn't really think about it. I just assumed I'd be a coach. But when the UFC gave me the opportunity, I then found myself with two fighters that are facing each other. And I'm like, well, I can now just apply exactly what I've done to both sides. So I'm going to watch Robbie Lawler, then I'm going to watch Roy McDonald, then I'm going to watch Robbie Lawler from Roy McDonald's perspective, then I'm going to watch Roy McDonald from Robbie Lawler's perspective. And then usually what I would do is I would spend a couple of training sessions being those people. So I would be Robbie Lawler or Southpaw, right? And then I'd be Roy McDonald. And I'd try and feel their game and how they move. And I mean, that would help me learn as well. You know, like there were a lot of people I learned parts of their game just from watching them and then training as if I was that person. And again, something I used to do back in my career, I'd watch Roy Jones and then go to the boxing gym, you know, or I'd watch, whoever else, Kid Yamamoto, and then go and do sprawl and brawl drills at the gym. And you know what I mean? I always found there was a benefit in mimicking people. So then when it comes to breaking people down, it just kind of was a follow on from the process that I'd already been doing.
You know, for guys who watch tape, like, I feel like that what you just spoke about is the kind of the highest level I've heard somebody talk about watching tape, like, is, you know, researching a fighter is to embody who they are, which is it's really, really interesting. Did you take into account like emotions, ego, like things like that? Did you start to like, oh, they might take a chance here because they think this, or is that to this kind of level you would get to with it?
Yeah, absolutely. And then obviously, you know, because obviously with that you can manipulate the way that someone's feeling. You know, and this is where martial arts gets really, really fascinating for me, because like as a striker, and the best strikers in the world, the likes of Israel Adesanya and Anderson Silva and, you know, Ramon Decker's one of my favorites, Canelo, You know, what they're so good at is forcing you to do something you don't want to do, forcing you to move in a particular direction that you don't want to move, but you're doing it subconsciously because you're pressured in that direction. Now, like, wrestling and grappling makes a lot more sense to people that don't understand it, because if you push somebody, they're going to move, right? If I pull somebody's head down, they're going to snap their head back. Like, the action reaction is way more obvious. Whereas if I've got someone trapped up against a wall and I pivot just 10% or just 5% to my left, they're going to feel like a door is opened on my right side and they're going to scoot out that way. But they don't necessarily know that I've forced them to move in that direction, because they don't know that I've opened that door for them. And the more subtle I can make it, the less they're going to realize that I'm putting them on the end of a strike that they're being set up to move on to. Like, one of my last fights, probably my favorite knockout in my career, was because of how controlled it was from the start to the finish. And it was I was a big fan. I am a big fan of Dwayne Ludwig, one of my favorite fighters to watch. Great Muay Thai fighter that crossed over into MMA. And obviously, when I was on a 4-fight losing streak, when I was offered him as an opponent, and I'm like, he is a handful of a fighter. So I went back to the tapes and I watched all of his fights, and I was looking for different things in his game. And he was credited, I don't know whether he still holds the record, but he was credited for having the fastest knockout in the UFC, right? Jonathan Goulet came crashing across the octagon, and Dwayne Ludwig just popped him on the chin, knocked him out cold with a short right hand. And the more I watched this, the more I realized how good he is at this right hand, how confident he is at just going from here, pop, without any wind up or any big power or anything. And I knew that would be something he'd be looking at landing, because it's his go-to. It's his, as soon as someone steps forward aggressively, he's looking at tagging him with that right hand. But what I realized is that as soon as that right hand comes away from his chin, there's a gap here, right? And again, like, my fights are my learning experiences as well, because as soon as the fight happened, I knew that right hand was in his arsenal, and I walked onto it. Bam, stung me. My legs were gone. You can see it in the fight. I grab a hold of him and I run him to the fence. And I'm just holding him against the fence, like, while I'm trying to clear my head and get my legs back underneath me. And in hindsight, I can see that me getting tagged with that shot was a benefit, because it reinforced his confidence in that punch. He's like, I've hit him with it once, I hurt him with it, I'll hit him with it again. So, and my game plan was to prey on that right hand. I wanted him to pull that right hand away from his chin, so there was a gap here for me to hit my left hook. And I didn't intend on getting hit with the right hand, but because I did, it gave him the confidence to lean more into that technique. So a bit later in that round, as I'm moving around, I pump my lead hand as if I'm going to throw a jab, so he looks to counter it. And I see him throw that hand, I'm like, he's ready to go. And straight away off it, I throw the jab again as a feint. He pulls his right hand to counter, and I come around the side to catch him. And it, like, that, for me, that was like, I knew what I wanted to hit, and it still didn't go perfectly, because I still got hit with the right hand that I didn't want to get caught with, that I was well aware of. But it reinforced his confidence in that technique at the same time, which ultimately worked as a benefit to me. Like, and again, I look at that in hindsight and I go, man, like, I can see how that played out. It doesn't mean, but now I've seen how it played out, it means I can now replicate that in another scenario with complete control over it, right? I could take that right hand, knowing full well I'm taking that right hand, and be ready to take it. I can even play possum a little bit, like it's hurt me. You know, you can draw people into these traps all the time in martial arts, and that's a real high level of operating in mixed martial arts that was beyond me when I was competing, and I see it so occasionally now. But when I do see it, it's very, very special.
Did you play into, like, the pre-fight, like getting into someone's head? You know, for me, one that stands out is Conor and Aldo. You know, that fight. Is that a similar kind of thing, or would you think that was luck based, or is that? No,
that was perfectly set up by Conor. That was, I mean, he was one of the best at it. You know, and that was a good example of how you can play on the psychology of somebody. And you know, the benefit as well of fighting at the level that Conor was at, he could get information on Aldo, on his tells, so he could set him up for a knockout shot. Whereas if I'm showing up to a sports hall and fighting whoever shows up, I might need to spend the first round getting that read off them, right? I might not have the time to put the invest the time into a psychological game, or I might be up against someone that just it's not gonna work on, right? Like I had 2 fights back to back. One was Marcus Davis, and he was a very emotional guy. Still is a very emotional guy. I have nothing against him, never did, but I knew that I could get under his skin. And I knew there would be a benefit to getting under his skin, partly because he didn't need to fight me because he was higher up in the rankings, and partly because I knew that fighting him was going to be an opportunity at like a much bigger stage in my career. Like I was fighting decent guys, but like I made my UFC debut against Akihiro Gono, who was way better than people knew. So I didn't get the credit for beating him, even though he was a real tough Japanese veteran. And then the next guy was a massive puncher, but I knocked him out in just over a minute. So I didn't like that, didn't really resonate too much. And I kind of knew that Marcus Davis, he was putting a lot of people away with big power, and I thought he would be a good target. But I also recognized he was very, very emotional, and he was very much invested in his Irish heritage. Even though he was born in the US and, he was the Irish hand grenade, and, like everything about him was, he wore a kilt, and he went he went all the way down that route of like linking himself to Ireland. And this was way before McGregor or anything like this, so a lot of the Irish fans loved him as well. But I just started to poke fun at that a little bit because I knew it would upset him. Not that kid, I don't care, he can say wherever he wants he's from, but I knew that if I would start to poke at that, it would upset him and I would get a rise out of him, and I did. And he hated me, still hates me. Like I had t-shirts made that say I hate Dan Hardy on them, and gave them out at the weigh-ins because that was his line. Like he said in the Countdown show, he had this whole skit at the start and it was all dark and dramatic, and he's like, when I was a little kid, I would say I hate this and I hate that, and my mother would say, Marcus, you don't hate that unless you think about how much you dislike it a little bit every day. And then he paused and he goes, I hate Dan Hardy. And then it cuts to me and I'm laughing my ass off because I've nailed it. I've got him exactly where I want him. And I knew if I got him in that mindset, he was going to show up all hulked out, big muscular back and shoulders and stuff, and he was going to try and wrestle me. And I needed to get him into that state, because what I didn't want to be dealing with was when he was a confident, loose southpaw boxer. And when he was confident he was going to knock somebody out, he would come in looking very, very different. But if he was coming in against a good striker who was confident, he would grapple with them. And I wanted to force him into that mindset. So I picked on him and I teased him. And it couldn't have worked any better, really. Like even between rounds, his coach was saying things like, you're going to shut him up, Marcus. It was way more about the emotion involved in the fight than anything else. And I got him in such an emotional state that he was reckless. Like I cut him, dropped him with a knee, elbowed him bad, opened his face up. It was just a bad night for him all in all, but I'd laid the foundations in the weeks leading up to it by getting him in that mindset where he was going to be reckless and make bad decisions because I had control then, right? And then my next opponent, Mike Swick, who's getting punched in the face up there in that painting, again, another lovely guy, love Mike Swick. But he just seen what I did to Marcus Davis and was ready, fully expecting me to come guns blazing with the trash talk. So I didn't do anything. I just went quiet for the whole training camp because I knew that the trash talking would make him feel comfortable because he was expecting it. So I decided I was going to go a different direction entirely. I went completely silent. And that, I would imagine, was quite unnerving for him because he's like, what's he working on? Where's he gone? Why is he being quiet? And then I showed up at the press conference with a runner-up trophy for him, just to kind of poke fun at it a little bit. And then we had a great fight. But I knew it wasn't worth it to invest any time in that psychologically. He just wouldn't have bought into it. He would have thought it was funny. He would have enjoyed it. So I just didn't want to give it to him,
Had you read The Art of War at that point?
Oh, yeah. I The Art of War was a good one, but I always preferred the Hagakure. I never know how to say it. Hagakure, by a samurai called Yamamoto Tsunemoto. Most people will have heard of the movie Ghost Dog with Forrest Whitaker. And that's a movie based on, he's an assassin that's living by the code of the samurai. But I remember reading that book way before the movie was written, way before the movie was made, and that was a real turning point for me. And also something else that I got from that book as well was understanding that balance comes, like, you know, progress comes from balance. Like this, like the samurai way of life was like, yeah, you've got to be a master swordsman, but you also need to learn how to pour tea correctly. And you know what I mean? Like there are painting or calligraphy or whatever else. You were never just a samurai. To be a samurai, you had to be a poet or something else to bring balance to you. So that was always something I found comfort in, because like the artistic side of me was still kind of encroaching on my martial arts as well. And, you know, so like a lot of the old samurai philosophy I enjoyed. Book of the Five Rings, of course, you know.
I hope you're enjoying this episode with Dan Hardy so far. I want to say a massive thank you to our subscribers, our supporters across all the platforms, from Patreon to Instagram to Spotify to our subscribers here at YouTube. Thank you so much. If you want to get exclusive content from interviews like this and Master Shihang Yi and Billy Billingham, and see additional episodes that we can't upload onto YouTube, go to the link down below on Patreon, where you'll find exclusive content, and it helps support make all of this possible. So thank you to our Patreon community. Let's dive back into the episode.
It was interesting. I heard you talk about, it was a really good example of military warfare and how that applies to combat sports. Have you got any more that you can think of? Or do you remember the one that you said? It was on I can't remember what podcast it was. It might have been the Rogan, but you said that you like to study war, and there was a reason for it.
Yeah, well, yeah. So the guy I was talking about was Dan Carlin, and he has a podcast called Hardcore Histories, which, I mean, he's got an amazing voice. He's like got a proper radio voice, and he's like he loves what he's talking about. Like, I mean, his podcasts, he'll do 3 hour long podcasts about the Peloponnesian Wars or something. But whatever he's doing, he really gets into it and paints beautiful pictures of like how the Apaches were, or what it was like to fight the Scythians, and often when he's talking about something, like he's explaining a tactic of a particular type of military. And most militaries in the world now have they all look pretty much the same, right? They've all got pretty much the same things. But back in those days, when Darius the Great was putting his Persian army together, like he was bringing in a group from, you know, Tunisia, and a group from Morocco, and a group from, I mean, Carthage or whatever it would have been at the time. But you understand what I'm saying? Like, he was bringing tribes from all over the Persian Empire to bring their own fighting styles into his army. It wasn't like everybody's got to be cookie cutter the same. So in this time, you had a real interesting like soup of different styles of combat that no one knows what they're doing, right? No one really knows what they're doing. It's all based on what logically makes sense, either hunting or, you know, fighting with sticks or studying animals or whatever. A lot of different tactics, like the Shaolin Kung Fu, is from studying animals fighting. And so then you have really interesting clashes where you've got hoplites, Greek hoplites, Athens, Sparta, etc., etc. And all of a sudden they're clashing with a Mongol tribe that are all on horseback with arrows, with bows and arrows. And they're not cut out to fight an army like that, because they've not seen one before. So then when I'm hearing him talking about these things, I keep going, well, you know, the way that the Greek hoplites fight is very much like the way that Khabib fights, right? He's not really going to take a back step. He's going to slowly march you down, and he's going to get a hold of you, and he's going to force you to the floor, and he's going to smash you to pieces, right? And if you think the way that the hoplites fight, and you see this at the end of 300, you've got that shield wall line, all bronze shield walls, right? You've got this big line of shield walls, you've got spears pointing out, and then you've got the guys behind them with the short swords that are finishing anybody off on the floor that they've walked over. But the point of that front line is to march that shield wall forward, right? Over everything. March over everything. Doesn't matter what it is, just eat the ground up and kill everything in your path. And that is so much like what Khabib and the Dagestani wrestlers do in their style. But then you go, well, you look at what the Scythians did, and I mean, you might have an army of 10,000 guys all on horseback, but they might have a group of skirmishers that will ride out to the front line of the hoplites. And they do this thing called feigned flight, which I loved. We call it playing possum, right? I can give you examples in MMA where people have done this. Fabricio Verdum did this against Mark Hunt, where these Scythians, 20 or 30 of them on horseback, would charge at the front line of the hoplites, and they'd pelt them with rocks and arrows and stuff, and then they'd pretend that, oh damn, we can't deal with these guys, we're going to run away. So then they all turn their horses and they start to charge away. And then that little group of hoplites, if they're not disciplined, are like, we've got them on the run, let's go. Then they break that shield wall and charge after them. Then they get encircled by the guys on horseback who are far more mobile. And that is counter-striking, right? That is, you skirmish a little bit, you get someone to attack them, then you catch them with the counter, right? I throw my jab out there to get you to counter it, and then I counter your counter, right? I get you to step on that lead leg, and I'm going to hack that lead leg as you step onto it. Or, to take it even further, going back to my Dwayne Ludwig fight, if I'd have had the foresight to really control the situation all the way through, I could have let him tag me on the chin and pretend to be really hurt, feigned flight, then he comes at me and I crack him as he runs in. Like, so you see these things happening often in like old, like military scenarios. Like the other one, which is illustrated beautifully in the movie Alexander, is where they separate the line. So they have Alexander's cavalry rides along away from the main line to separate the Persians, and then he attacks straight through the gap, the chink in the armor. And again, I see this often. I've been following the war in Ukraine since it started, and there was a beautiful moment in that where there was a bait and switch tactic by the Ukrainians. You'll remember probably a year ago or so, something where they punched through the Russian lines and took a big portion back of northern Ukraine. And the reason why that was successful was because all of the communications from all of the world leaders that were supporting Ukraine and all of the troop movement was bringing people down into the south of Ukraine as if they were going to push in the south. So then the Russians moved all their troops into the south and left the north weak. Just a simple bait and switch tactic, right? Anderson Silva looking at Vitor Belfort's leg. So when he flicks his leg, Vitor Belfort thinks he's getting his leg kicked and he gets a foot in the face and gets knocked out. Simple bait and switch tactic. It just repeats itself over and over again, but on a grand scale with 100,000 people on a front line or with two guys in an octagon in the O2 Arena.
It's so interesting. Like, I think we could talk about that all day, call me that. It's just so interesting. Unfortunately, we can't. But like, it's incredible. And I think that's the importance of having creative thinking, you know, like not being boxed into, well, it's all I have to study within combat sports and that's it. Like looking outside of that and pulling from different areas, even, you know, art, war, through books and teachings and philosophies, like it aids to be the greatest and most interesting fighters and athletes. Like it really is. I'm curious with GSP, working up to that, like what was the embodiment of that like for you? Like was it, you know, so you knew what I'm guessing you kind of knew what you was getting into, but like was there, as you were embodying that, thinking from his perspective, what did that feel like, you know?
He was an interesting challenge, GSP, because obviously he was the world champion and he was an established world champion, but I also knew that he had a lot of good people around him, right? Like he had John Danaher in his camp, who was a genius mind, still is now to this day, is a great mind of martial arts. So I didn't only feel like I was up against a team of people that were working together to dismantle me, you know, and that felt that was a very unusual feeling to have, because I was in quite an unsettled place in my own camp. Like I didn't have a solid jiu-jitsu coach. You know, I had one of Eddie Bravo's students come out and corner me from the West Coast. And then I had my Thai boxing coach who had only cornered me once before in an MMA fight. And so it wasn't the ideal corner team really. And I was up against this powerhouse of a team. And I also knew, based on GSP's previous training camps and stuff, that they were going to do the whole psychological analysis on me and everything. Like they really go to town on it, much like I was doing with other people, but they were doing it as a team. But what I realized about GSP is that we're quite similar in a few ways. Like I can see that one of the things that drove him to be so good was anxiety, right? It was fear of being beaten up by someone that was better than him. And I knew that I knew that with my image and with a couple of the knockouts that I'd had in my career and stuff, I could instill that feeling in him that you just don't want to strike with me. It's just not worth rolling that dice, because I'm game and I enjoy the fight. Like, that's why I was grinning when we were facing off, and that's why at the weigh-ins I'm like bouncing, like I can't wait to get my hands on you, bro. Like, I can't wait to punch you in the face. And I wanted to just emit that feeling all the time. But then there was a point during the training camp where, and I think this kind of worked for two different reasons. One, I lost my grandfather, who was a big part of my martial arts journey. He like took me to train and trained with me for 5-6 years, and so like losing him a few weeks before the fight was a real hit, because if ever I had like a day in training camp where I was like shaking a little bit confidence wise, I knew I could just go and sit with him, and he was so matter of fact. You know what I mean? It was like what they're gonna do. You know what I mean? It was always his energy, and I loved that impenetrable positivity that he always had around what I was capable of, and like and the very very kind of old school granddad thing. He's like, well, it's him that wants to be bloody nervous, bloody, like proper Nottingham accent. Well, he needs to be nervous because he knows you're going to stove his bloody head in. Those kind of things, like old word, like stove his head in, and, like proper old school granddad, and he was just so matter of fact. And so I lost him. Like I was with him when he died in the hospital, and I was like in and out of his room doing interviews for the fight. And so losing him certainly connected me back to my traditional martial arts background, but also because GSP came out with the gi and was like, he's like the Karate Kid, you know what I mean? Like everyone, like all the fans loved him because he was like a proper traditional martial artist. So this is when I got my video from when I was training in China and sent it to the UFC for the Countdown show. And then they took some clips of me doing Kung Fu in the forest with the monks, and all of a sudden that was a little bit unnerving, because initially I think he just thought I was a brawler. Like that was the way the UFC had kind of branded me, technical brawler. In actuality, I've been studying martial arts since I was 6, like properly studying it, like as many styles as I could get my hands on. It wasn't like I was just in the gym hitting the bag every day, which was kind of the way that painted me a little bit. So that I realized was way more unnerving for him when he realized that I was as dedicated as he was to martial arts. And I mean, it was, I just wasn't in the fight. That was the most frustrating thing about it. But I also didn't get beaten up at all. I didn't take any damage. I got my arm twisted a little bit, but there was no damage from that. But like coming out of that fight gave me a lot of confidence, because I realized that I didn't have the skills to beat him, but I certainly had the psychological presence to be able to, force people, railroad them into not striking with me. You know what I mean? That's kind of how it felt. And what was great is that after that, the fight and the training camp and everything, I actually went and trained with him a few times and helped him out for other fights. And I mean, he's we'd have been best mates if he'd have been born in Nottingham. We'd have been really good friends. Like, he loves dinosaurs and stuff. You know what I mean? It's like he's just a really good dude. Another martial artist that had kind of found it in the same ways that I had. He just obviously made much better decisions with his training.
Wow. Okay. So I mean that's for me, like, it's interesting hearing the story behind that moment as well. I think something that I heard you speak about was your heart condition and all those kind of things. Like, at what point in the career did that become? Was it a present thought or an issue? Like, when you was going into these fights, was you worried about that, or?
I have no idea.
When did it become like a thing where you're like, okay, this is like? Do you remember the transition period from it's not a problem, it's I'm going to be okay, to I'm going to have to make a decision on this? What was that point like?
It was just around my last fight, really. I mean, so like after I fought GSP, I went on a losing streak. I lost 4 fights in a row, and I was kind of almost retired. I was, if I'd have lost a 5th fight, I was going to go back to university, was my plan. And that 5th fight was Dwayne Ludwig at the MGM, and I won that fight. Then I went on and won another one after that, which was the one in Nottingham against Amir Sadallah. And in my head, I was right, 18 months, I'm going to have another run at this and see how it goes. Get back to the belt was the plan. And then I was locked in for a fight in April of 2013, and that was when I went to do tests. As you would normally in training camp, you do a bunch of different medical tests, but because it was California, they required an ECG, which I'd not had to do before. And when the doctor did the ECG, just as as everybody on the card would have been, yep, everything's fine, you're cleared, you can fight. But they wouldn't clear me, and the doctor said, well, what's showing up is that you've got 2 electrical pathways, you've got 2 heartbeats, you've got your main heartbeat, but then there's also a group of cells somewhere else in your heart that's producing an electrical current that you don't want. And I can't clear you to fight because you might have a heart attack. He said, so the solution is that we can ablate it. They go in your carotid artery and in your femoral artery, and they like feed these things in through your arteries. And they find the cells and they burn them, and that it should take care of it. But most of the time, this thing comes with side effects, symptoms. I was asymptomatic. I had no problems at all, and I'd been I'd probably had 250 fights at this point, and I'd pushed myself, and I felt confident that my body was going to hold up. I didn't want anybody poking and burning bits or whatever, so I told them I didn't want to do it. They wouldn't clear me to fight, so I came back to the UK to see my doctor, and he said the same thing. I went to see a specialist, and they tested it, and they were like, "Don't touch it, it's fine." And then the more I looked into it, the more I had people telling me, "Yeah, I had this thing, didn't know I had it." All of a sudden I'm sitting on the sofa and my heart rate goes up to 140 beats a minute. So they took me in, they've ablated it, and I was fine for a few weeks, and then it came back, and so it looked like a can of worms that I didn't need to open. So I was stubborn about it, but they wouldn't clear me to fight. And then by the time I'd got cleared to fight, I was already well into a commentary career, and I was on the road almost all the time, and I went from being at a show 3 times a year to being at a show 40 times a year. And I felt like I was, especially with when the analysis shows started to get traction, I felt like I was serving the sport in a really positive way, like the breakdown shows and stuff. I had so many people come up to me and they're like, "Oh, I didn't even realize it was this complicated." I'm like, honestly, I'm scratching the surface. There's so much more, and there is so much more still to be shown. But for whatever reason, particularly the UFC, they're not producing that kind of content. But now with the PFL, I'm going to start producing that kind of content a bit more now. But it was, I got a lot of fulfillment out of educating people and sharing what I understood about the sport, and because it made me feel like the sport was growing in the right direction. It was moving away from all the conversations about why this should be banned and why it should be illegal what you're doing, and you know what I mean? Because I was living with those misconceptions when I was training for the GSP fight as well, which is not prevalent at all now. People don't have those conversations about why MMA should be banned when they're training for title fights. So and I feel like some of that analysis, some of that work that I did post-fight career was one of the reasons why I feel like the fan base grew in that way, with a bit more of an awareness of what the fighters can do.
Yeah, I think for me, the first investment for me was UFC telling the fighter stories. I thought that was a fantastic job, like really, putting the stories behind the fighters and getting investment in that way from people. But now, is the art of fighting, I think it's somewhat people go down and they see a brawl and they like that and it's entertaining, but it's at this very surface level. When you talk about things like the subtle feints and getting into somebody's head and understanding that, if you were to bait them in this way, that's where there's so much interest. And I think you're right. The sport needs that, and it really gets people invested in when it's simple. And I think that it goes back to the earlier conversation about when it's simple, people think, "Oh, I could go in there and do that." But knowing that you can't, like knowing that if I went in there and I would just be mauled alive because these guys know a completely different way of fighting than you know, on a completely different like level instinctively like than you do. Like that's so interesting to me. Like we're watching something truly great and truly special. The same way like you say something like tennis, like such a technical sport, like that's where I think people really need to understand what's in the sport and why it's such a beautiful sport as well.
Yeah.
The art of fighting.
Yeah. Like I think one other thing that really helped as well was at the same time as I was doing these analyses shows, we had the emergence of great fighters like Khabib and McGregor, you know, because like, and they had such different games, both of them, you know, like, and we've talked about the Greek hoplites and the way that they kind of eat the ground away. And that's what Khabib would do. He would trap you up against the fence. Like there's all this space behind him, but you're in that little space up against the fence and he's talking to you while he's beating you up. You know what I mean? It's a very oppressive style. Whereas then McGregor's style is way more, I mean, I jokingly say it's way more like witchcraft. It's like magic what he does because he's not in physical contact. People understand that Khabib grabs someone and controls them on the floor, but they don't understand the way that McGregor plays with the space between a fighter because they don't understand how that can be manipulated. Like a lot of people could look at the McGregor-Aldo fight and go, well, I could throw that punch, so therefore I could knock out Aldo. But what they don't understand is the hours and hours of drilling, of recognizing those triggers in Aldo's frame that was going to get McGregor to move back to throw that punch. And then on top of that, all of the work that McGregor had done in the build up to that, riding into the favelas on horseback, etc., all of that foundation that he led to get Aldo into that state where he was like, got to get my hands on him, you know? And Aldo was always one of my favourite fighters. I loved him. It broke my heart to see him hit the canvas like that, but not for not wanting to see McGregor have success. It was rough to see him go out in such an easy way because now people were going to discount him as being a great fighter, which was almost going to undermine how great McGregor's finish was, you know? And it's like people watch McGregor, it's like, well, he's just got a great left hand. But again, this is something I've broken this down before, and we can link it to a particular military strategy, right? A very, very famous battle, the Thermopylae 300, right? Where 300 fighters forced the Persian army into a choke point, right? People would not guess that McGregor does the same thing to his opponents, to put them on the end of that left hand. But he does. It's exactly the same situation. It's systematic. Like, this is why I have chalk on the floor in the gym, because we draw out the angles of the cage. That 135 degrees is deadly for McGregor. And unlike a boxer, most of the time a southpaw boxer will want you moving towards the left hand. But McGregor wants you moving away from it, because he slides you down a fence panel until you hit the next one. And the angle, that 135 degrees, brings you closer to his left hand. So it forces you into a choke point where you have to deal with the power. It's fascinating. And everything else about his game, all the big hands and the spinning kicks, all that is puffer fish. It's all bravado to get you squeezed into a choke point. It's beautiful work. It's really, really clever. And it's so easy to discount how clever it is because no one's talking about it. And sometimes these fighters don't even know they're doing it. Sometimes like we talked about, they'll discover a small pocket, a small rhythm within the sport that works for them, right? And I can do this thing over and over again. I can walk you onto this head kick like Cro Cop. Everyone knew Cro Cop was going to kick him in the head, and he still kicked everybody in the head, right? Because he understands that little niche in the sport and how to apply that one deadly weapon in 15 different ways. And just that one weapon with 5 different delivery systems is enough complexity to smash most people out of the water. So that's what I say to other fighters when I'm coaching to them. Like, imagine if you can take McGregor's left hand and Cro Cop's left head kick. Like, straight away, you double the fighter, and they were formidable fighters, right? And then you go with your 3-beat GSP takedown, right? Double leg, run the pipe, knee tap. Super simple 3-hit combination for takedowns. Then you've got 3 takedowns and 10 ways of delivering 2 knockout strikes. And all of a sudden the complexity is massive. But people get stuck into these little pockets because they don't necessarily realize what they're doing sometimes. I don't think McGregor consciously realizes that he's putting people into a choke point. I just think he's realized over the hours and hours of sparring when he gets people in that point, he can catch them with his left hand. You know, it's like that the slip counter he uses as well, same thing. It's reps and reps and reps. It's forcing people to throw their hands so he can feed off it. And there's so much left to be discovered still.
It is truly fascinating. I think when you highlight the genius inside that, I think that's where the audience is like, wow, this is special. Like, this is really, really interesting. Because I think you're right. I could probably throw that left that Conor did. Like, that's what they think. But the setup to get there, and the same thing of like avoiding a certain kick, like everyone knows it, but like and people, most likely the audience, I think I've probably been guilty of this, is why is he there? Like, he knows the kick's dangerous. Why is he there still? But there's so much more to it that we don't see because we don't know. So highlighting that to me is so interesting. I'm curious, have you ever, I don't know if you're probably allowed to, but like, have you ever tested your analytical skills for like betting or anything like that? Like, have you ever proven your skills on stuff like that?
No, I haven't really. I haven't. I mean, I've never. I always feel like luck's finite, so I don't want to waste it on stuff like that. You know what I mean? Especially because I've leaned on luck many times in my life, and it's always had my back. So I wouldn't want to squander it. Is my thought process in that. But the other thing I recognize as well, and I see this from doing, we do a picks podcast, right? And Veronica and I will sit and we'll talk about usually the top 5 fights on the UFC main card, and we'll discuss the tactics and we'll make picks and stuff. But I'll often make a pick just to be the antithesis of what she's picking, or just to be outlandish a little bit. But I also recognise that sometimes I can fall in love with an underdog a bit. I can fall in love with an idea of something that might happen, which can skew my perspective. And often I'll be like, wow, I could see this happening. And now once I've seen it happening, this is a weird connection, but if I lose something, it will take me ages to find. I don't generally lose things. I'm very, very good at not losing things. But if I lose something, it takes me ages to find it because I can see it so clearly in my head in so many different places. You know, like my good imagination as a kid, when I was a velociraptor or a pirate, has now, transferred into something that could be quite problematic, because I can clearly visualize something so well that I can see how easy it would happen.
It's so funny you to say that. We've got an ice bath. This is a random story. I got an ice bath at the studio, and I had to change the filters recently, and I had this special key tool, white thing, big circle, and I pictured it exactly where it was. I was like, I'll go grab that. And I went to go, it wasn't there. And I was like, oh, no. I've pictured it and I was darting around, the studio for a good week or so. I couldn't find it. I had to order a new one.
There's some psychoanalysis in there, because I don't think everyone can do that.
Yeah.
I think some people have got a mind where they can create that image, and then they can sell them that image.
I fully believed it where it was. Yeah. I'm like, oh no, I've got it. I'll go to it's not there. You've just done that with your passport. Yeah. He couldn't come on a film trip because he lost his passport, but he knew where it was the whole time.
It's not there.
It's not there.
Yeah. But then, it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier. Like, if I'm watching two fighters, I can be in that person's body. You know what I mean? I can switch from one person to another, and I can, when I'm doing visualization work, I'm doing everything from the feel of the canvas to the heat of the lights. I want everything to be as realistic as possible, because when I step there, I want to feel like I've been there 1,000 times before. That's why I've got a canvas on the wall in the main room. Did you notice that?
Yeah, I did. Yeah. So I think I'm trying to think who it was who spoke about it. They were trying to get, it might have been Michael Chandler. Someone was on about getting a certain ring to get the smell and have that presence whilst they're there. But I think we've said the same with artists and filmmaking, and one of the most important things is to have like that empathy, be empathic, so you can understand perspective. I guess it really works for fighting, like to like you said, like get embodying somebody else to understand why they would throw a certain punch. And I could talk about that all day. That idea of being in somebody else's head, looking at you, thinking, well, what's he gonna do, and how am I gonna react to that, and then being able to reverse that and use that to your advantage. Just really, we could pick that apart.
Well, I'll be super quick, but there was something that happened a few weeks ago, which was a good example of, and again, it's a good example for me of how I'm seeing it differently, because I'm only seeing it from my perspective. Like, I don't know how Sean O'Connell or Randy Couture, who are sitting next to me, are seeing this. I know how I'm seeing it, so as a commentator, I'll just communicate what I can see. And in the first round of Brendan Loughnane's championship fight, I said, there's something wrong with his knee. He's not moving right on his leg. And he did 25 minutes. But after the fight, he said, you were right in commentary. He said it straight away. Got a knee injury. I'm like, and I could just, because I'm not watching him, I'm feeling the way that he's moving based on being him in that moment. And I can see that his leg's not moving right? Or like I had an opponent once and I can look at his collarbone and I'm like, that jab's not going to be powerful because I can see he's dislocated his collarbone in the past and it's not been repaired properly. You know what I mean? So like sometimes like...
Well, I think most people look towards you and you say, oh, I had a really bad knee or a bad hip that I couldn't tell. Like I didn't know. But like, yeah, being able to tune into that, yeah, what a powerful tool.
Like I often you can see someone covering up that they've been hurt and they're hiding it. And I'll often say in commentary, he's hurt, that body shot hurt him. And you'll see him like trying to hide it and trying to cover it. And even sometimes their opponent won't. But that's the difference with having an internal conversation going on and having an ability to observe what's going on. Like they get in one another's way. I always talk, like if I'm thinking about what techniques I'm going to throw, I'm not watching what my opponent's doing, right? So if I'm thinking, right, well, okay, I'm going to throw a jab cross and a hook next. I'm going to throw my jab cross hook completely, regardless of what the person's going to do in front of me. When in actuality, when I throw my jab, they might counter me straight away and my technique's useless. So what I need to do is I need to test with that, but I can't do that unless I'm outside of myself observing them. And a lot of people, they've got this internal conversation going on where they're only thinking about what they're doing, and they don't breach that boundary of being able to be empathic towards their opponent. Because like we can be empathic in good ways and bad ways, right? You can see someone that looks like they're going to cry and you can go and help them out and give them a hug and support them, whatever. Or you can see someone's got a shot that, had a shot to the body that hurt them and they're trying to hide it. And I'm going to exploit that weakness, right? And it's the same thing with calf kicks. And, sometimes people can't hide it, but sometimes they try really hard to. And if you have that, if you're blocking your ability to be empathic towards your opponent, you're not going to pick up on those kind of things. It's another level of martial arts that is not really being worked on or understood or expressed very often.
How have you worked the most on those aspects of life? Like, do you meditate? Do you do, like, is it plant medicines? Like, I know it's probably a combination of a few things, but does something stand out to you?
Visualization's always been a real big part of things for me because I was always aware that something was making me anxious. Like the idea, like fight week's not a comfortable time. Like you wake up on fight day and you feel it's a horrible feeling. Like, and I can only liken it to sitting in a maths class and knowing that as soon as the class is over, you're gonna have a fight in the playground, and then for the next 55 minutes, your heart's pounding, right? But have that for a week or for 6 weeks, right? And then you get better at managing that feeling. But then when you get there for fight week, it hits you. And like, okay, now it's real. And then you wake up on fight day and, oh, now it's real. Now someone's going to try and murder me later today. So you kind of, I always felt like you've got to cross that bridge before you arrive at it. And you can't do that without visualization. Like, if I know that fight week's going to make me anxious, then I want to force that anxiety onto myself every day before I get there. Because then when I arrive at that place, that anxiety is not going to feel really, really uncomfortable. It's going to be uncomfortable, but it's going to feel more familiar than anything, right? And it goes the same for dealing with that anxiety in fight week, but to dealing with it in the cage as well. I don't want new experiences in the cage, and which is a challenge because it's not a space that anyone's got access to. Like you can't go and get in a cage this weekend. Do you know what I mean? Like most gyms don't have cages these days. So like the idea of stepping into a cage that's got a particular type of canvas and steps that walk up to it with the tread plates, grip on them, and the little grill that you could cross over with the light shine through before you step onto the canvas, and how the canvas is a 1/2 inch raised up and it feels different, it smells different. You know what I mean? It's like I have the fortune of being there, so I can replicate it in my mind. But I always say to fighters, look, if the fight's making you anxious, you've got to live it every day. You've got to put yourself in that uncomfortable place to the point where it becomes familiar to you.
Just a quick interruption for the video, guys. As many of you know, we are independent creators and filmmakers, but there is a massive attack on us right now. Traditional media over the last few years has started to slowly die. They are no longer the independent voice that you first thought they were. That's why we've created Mulligan Brothers Patreon. We've built something special for our most dedicated supporters, and I want to break it down for you real quick. The supporter tier gets you ad-free early access to both video and audio versions of Mulligan Brothers interviews 24 hours before it goes public. The executive tier gets you everything that a supporter tier gets, plus more. Exclusive interviews and behind the scenes content, walk and talks, daily routines, unreleased interviews, the stuff that you don't see anywhere else. And finally, the executive producer tier. Everything from the supporter tier and the executive tier, plus exclusive perks. Access to our treatment packages. Be the first to see which guests are coming up and get insight into the topics we'll be discussing before anyone else. And you'll even get an executive producer credit on every single documentary that we make. So if you've ever wanted to support the Mulligan Brothers mission of inspiring change so we can go around the world and get these stories that nobody else will, this is exactly how you do it. Go to patreon.com/Mulligan Brothers or click the link in the description or scan the QR code on screen. Join the community and help us inspire change. Let's dive back into the video.
You know what's so interesting is I think I've always approached anxiety completely different. I think a lot of people do. Is if you're feeling anxious, let's say we're talking about like a speaking engagement or an interview even, and I'm feeling anxious about that, and the week leading up to that is to mitigate those feelings, to get rid of them. And look, you know, in hindsight, looking back, the moment I arrived, it hit me like a ton of bricks instead. And it was like, I couldn't catch my voice. I felt nervous. I felt horrible. I don't think I've ever heard somebody advise like bend into it, but it makes complete sense. Like you'd be comfortable being there in the anxiety if you just embraced it. And I've not heard that before. Like that's a really interesting way of seeing it.
I mean, I think it's more obvious for me to see that because fighting's uncomfortable anyway. You know, like winning or losing, fighting's unpleasant. Like the preparing is unpleasant, the weight cutting is unpleasant, the feelings of anxiety when you're waiting for the fight, the whole process is unpleasant. And then after the fight, they're traveling home with bruises and cuts and swellings and, you know what I mean? The whole thing's unpleasant. So, like, if you don't start your preparations with that appreciation, that understanding, that expectation of the unpleasantness, then it's always going to feel more uncomfortable than it needs to. And people do different things to run from it as well. You know, people don't train, or they'll party, or they'll drink, or they'll train obsessively but not think about the fight, right? I could spend 6 hours a day training and not think about the fight once. Or I could spend 1 hour a day training and think about the fight non-stop for the other 23. Krishnamurti, observe yourself. Like, what are you struggling with? Like, if I'm not struggling with my technical stuff, but I'm not performing, then there's something else holding me back. And almost always the thing that stifles people is their anxiety, which then clouds their decision making. They make decisions out of fear. And this is a philosophy that extends into real life all the time. People make decisions out of fear, and they're almost always bad decisions. Right? If I can force someone in a fight to make a decision out of fear, they're playing into my hands, right? So I don't want to be vulnerable to that fear. And you know, and people watch my fights, and they I even, before I had a nickname, there was a journalist that would call me fearless in the columns, and I always thought it was kind of funny because I was never fearless, like never ever. I mean, I might have given the impression that I was fearless, of course, but I was still dealing with this internal turmoil of doubt and anxiety of, you know, not even anxiety of getting hurt, anxiety of just failing. You know, that was always the biggest challenge in my mind.
Mike Tyson spoke about being fearful, like all the way up until the fight. Like he was scared, he was fearful. I've just not heard, but that makes perfect sense to me of like embracing it, and I think everyone can relate to making decisions out of fear or I think fear is the best one, survival maybe even, and like you make the wrong decision. Hands down, 9 times out of 10, you're going to make the wrong decision, and when you can, I guess, embrace it is such a interesting perspective on that. That's yeah.
You have to have tools for it though, right? You can't just like you can't just let your mind run wild, because doubt will always creep in. Doubt will always creep in. You know, especially if you're trying to achieve something, trying to reach for a height that you've not reached for before. Like it's natural to have doubt come in, but you can't let that doubt run wild. You know, like I had two ways that I would deal with visualizations with my mind running out of control. So one of them was a very conscious, I'm sitting down and I'm visualizing the fight, and I would have a lot of different tactics. I would be big, I would glow, they would be small and withered and grey looking and weak, and you know, I would have a lot of different ways that I would create the scenario to give me a certain feeling, and then I would play through scenarios where I was beating them, and I was beating them in various different ways that I felt like were part of the game plan. Mm-hmm. But then every now and then, all of a sudden, in that visualization where you're sitting there and you're like, here I am, I'm winning, all of a sudden, then bam, you take a shot and you're down. And like all of a sudden, like your visualization spiraled out of control because anxiety's pushed its way in the door. So then a lot of people, they'll stay in that anxiety and they'll dwell on it. And then it becomes a what if. But what if they hit me? What if they take me down? What if they take my back? Right? What if they get a choking? What if I'm hurt? What if I'm gassed? You know what I mean? And all these doubts come in, and then this little moment of anxiety and this positive visualization then spirals out of control, and it takes you in a it's like a bad trip, right? You've got to be able to stop that as soon as it happens. Like my visualization was weird. It was like a furnace room, like a boiler room of a big ship or something. And I would imagine that the thing that I was watching, the visualization, all of a sudden then became a film, like a piece of old film. And I would cut that piece of film out and I would throw it in the furnace. And that piece of film that I cut out was that bad visualization where the person started to get the better of me. And that immediately would allow me to get straight back on track with my positive visualization. And if on the very occasional moment where I felt like I was still it was still eating at me and I still didn't have control, I would do this thing where I would like Russian dolls kind of visualize myself from further and further away. And no matter where I was always in my bedroom at my parents' house, which is where I started doing this work, where I'd be sitting on my bed or on the floor in the room, and I would see myself, and then I would zoom out and I would see the house from above. Then I would see the neighborhood. Then I would see the town, and I'd zoom out to the point where we're the blue dot from the famous photograph of the Voyager space, the last photograph of the Earth, and it just doesn't matter at that point, does it?
Completely agree, and I think I hope people don't hear that and think it's all woo-woo and rubbish, because those kind of techniques have helped me massively. The zoom out, the exact way you do it is, I think I'm in my mum's house in my bedroom and zooming out from that perspective, and like it helps me massively. And then the other things of like anxiety and rumination, overthinking, sometimes I'll physically write something down and just throw it away. Like, and it's just I think people think that's just rubbish, but stuff like that, it can be so powerful. Where I can't sleep, I could write something out, throw it in the bin beside me, and I'll go to sleep. It's gone. But people don't want to try it because it seems a bit stupid, I guess. But it's worth trying. You know, it definitely is worth trying. The zoom out one's massive. Did you just come up with that? Like, did you?
Yeah, I mean, I may have read it somewhere. It may have been something that I read, but it was certainly, I was chasing a feeling that I needed. I needed a feeling of insignificance, right? And that the blue dot has always made me feel like that. That photograph, like, it's just like, I mean, what matters?
Yeah.
Like, we are literally dust, you know? So like, as big as the moment feels to me in this time when I'm struggling with it, if I can make it insignificant, I can at least take the edge off it.
That's one of the things I've always thought of. I'd love to go to space to be able to see the Earth, and just I don't know if I heard this or I thought it, probably heard it, but the idea of just covering the Earth with your thumb, and like everything, all the wars, everything's behind that. You know, all these it makes your stresses and anxieties just fade away, like that perspective. Like, I think world leaders should be up there doing that kind of thing, you know. Would be fantastic. But the ayahuasca stuff, is that something I mean, what does that do? Does that give you that perspective of like, you have that, how would you describe it in like layman's terms?
It's difficult to describe it in layman's terms because I feel like I feel like that the relationship to plant medicines has become so estranged that we don't even really have the language to communicate about it. Like people always, like you hear the same things. You hear, you know, energy and, you know what I mean? But we just don't have the words for it really. I mean, like they were very, very powerful experiences for me. I mean, quite physical experiences at times, but obviously very, very internal. And you know, hallucinations, dreamlike states, feelings that of like past lives, living other people's lives, looking through other people's eyes. I mean, I've had a lot of these experiences not only with ayahuasca, like with psilocybin as well, and you know, and they're all part of the same network for me. It's all connecting with something. Where's the word? It's connecting with something, right? I remember someone said on the Spirit Molecule documentary that it feels like the waiting room between death and rebirth, and there's something very familiar about the space that you go to when you're well into a psychedelic journey. But the things that come out of it can be very, very different. You know, like I had experiences when I was in Peru where, I mean, I had past life experiences where I had failed and I died. I had one where I was in a pit in the Amazon, is what it felt like, and I was surrounded by my family group, my unit, and my tribe, and above us standing around the pit were conquistadors, and I just like I could close my eyes and see it. I could be there again. But it doesn't feel like it's outside of myself. It feels like something that I lived myself. But it was this horrible, overwhelming feeling of failure because my responsibility was to protect those people, and I didn't. And that was like, you know, that felt really heavy. Because you got to remember, my intention going into those first ayahuasca ceremonies was about being a fighter. Because I was on a losing streak. I'd literally just ended my losing streak. And then 2 days later got on a plane and went to Peru. So I was still questioning whether this was the right thing for me to do or whether I was right for this thing or not. So like I had a lot of questions around myself as a person, like being a successful person and failing as a person, failing as a fighter, as a warrior, you know. And all of this became very much linked to other people's experiences or what felt like other people's. You know, that certainly felt like I'd failed the tribe that I was there to protect, and I died. I had another one where I was a female tiger and I had cubs that were taken. I had one where I was the last wolf in England and I was being hunted by the people that were, I mean, you used to be able to pay your taxes with wolf skins in England. You know what I mean? They were hunted to extinction. But it was weird. It was such a very, very human feeling of like anger and disappointment and loneliness, but as a wolf, you know, which was very strange. And it's what I always found fascinating about this as well is that it none of it felt unfamiliar to me. I had a series of dreams when I was either 14 or 15. I think I was 14. I had 3 dreams back to back in a week, and in every one of those dreams I died, and every one was a different circumstance. I was a frontline soldier in a Revolutionary War. I was a miner that died in a mine collapse, and I was a Jewish woman that was executed by the Nazis in France. But again, with that one, I was protecting children who were executed with me. You know what I mean? So I don't know where this thread of failing to protect people came from, or whether that's played into the way that my life's panned out. But that's certainly something that's come up in my ayahuasca ceremonies, as well as my psilocybin ceremonies and my dreams, you know, before I had any psychedelic experiences. So yeah, it's so difficult to sum it up in layman's terms, because I just don't feel like the words exist for it. I feel like we're so distanced from what should be really, really fundamental in our growth as animals, as humans, and we're so disconnected from it because of the framework around us. That's kind of a bit depressing. But at the same time, I do feel like that is going to break through.
I mean, I've always had an overwhelming feeling that there is there is something that connects us to the past, through previous lives, and there's something there. I used to love that the film Cloud Atlas. I don't know if you've watched it. It's one of my favorite films, and like I've always felt that. But that's interesting to me. Then when you talk about, a lot of people talk about childhood traumas and childhood experience that leads to who you are today, but it does feel like there's something underneath that. There's something that makes you who you are.
But it goes back to empathy, doesn't it? Being empathic, right? Now, for like whatever it is, whether I believe in reincarnation or I believe that, I don't know, there's a collective consciousness that all of our experiences go into when we die, or whatever it is, I feel like I can tap into other people's experiences through reading books or listening to someone talk or watching them when they're competing, for example. Like we are all made up of other peoples that have existed previously, right? Like we're made up of other things. Like, we've all got iron in our blood that was in the stars, you know what I mean? So like we are all connected. I don't necessarily think we need to believe in some kind of reincarnation where souls jump from one being to another to be able to connect with everybody else around us, because we are connected. We are connected. There's just like my plants know when I'm on my way home. That's something that science has recently discovered. You know what I mean? It's like everything's connected and we don't see the threads connecting us. And I think those threads can extend into the past and potentially into the future as well. I have weird things that, like bagpipes, are very, very emotionally stirring for me, right? It's weird. Why is that?
Pipes, yeah.
Like there's something about certain sounds that resonate with something in my being, which brings something out of me, and I don't know what that is. And this is something else I'm getting into, like what frequencies, binaural beats can I use to influence the way that my mind's working, and can I learn quicker with binaural beats, and can you make healing music with the right frequencies? And I've got crystal bowls and shit hanging around the house and stuff, and I just think there's so much that we don't know. And like that inquisitive, excitable kid, that I feel like that's always been with me, and that keeps me driving now. Like every day I can wake up and I'm like, okay, what am I going to find out today?
I've heard that before about the music thing, and I just thought it was bagpipes. Like we grew up Braveheart, which is actually I think it's Irish flute, but when we listen to bagpipes, like you get that almost on the brink of tears, like that emotion comes through. And I'd explain that to friends and the people that I know who might not have that Irish, Scottish heritage, English heritage, whatever it is, and they said, no, I have a similar feeling with drums, or I have a similar feeling with this, and it's like a completely different type of music. It was not bagpipes. And that is really interesting to me, because we didn't grow up listening to bagpipes. It wasn't, like I say, watch Braveheart, but I wasn't around it. I wasn't taught that this is traditional and this is, but there's something there that's much, much deeper, that is sparking something from somewhere.
Yeah.
That's interesting to me. I'd love someone to do a really in-depth documentary of like trying to find out what that is.
There's something in the frequencies for sure.
Yeah,
I've heard recently there's been a few people that have been posting videos where they've got the Norse horns.
Yeah.
And like there's something about that as well, and the sound, but it's the frequency. Even my mum was talking about it the other day. She was watching something on TV where there was a group of people together singing, and it made her feel very, very emotional, and she couldn't explain it, And then like say when I've been out to Singapore to the Buddhist temple there, like they have a meditation floor above, like all the monks will sit in the main floor where the big statue is, and they've all got the crystal bowls and everything that's going on. But this room is like, it produces this very, very kind of guttural sounds, like a and the whole building vibrates with it. And last time I was in Singapore, I went specifically while they were there doing the chanting to go upstairs onto the meditation floor and sit and meditate, and you just feel it through you. It's like the whole thing, it's like you feel like it's lifting you off the ground.
Yeah. Just a little thing that you just like, it sparked back to me. As kids, we'd like hum a note, and we'd all do it together, like 3 or 4 of us, the brothers would do it just for fun, because when you start to all do it at the same frequency, you'd get this feeling and this sound. It just, unbelievable. I didn't even think of that. And we was doing a ceremony with I can't remember who it was, but it was in a temple, and they're all chanting, and like it really does something to you. Like I was getting like visions and stuff all night after that. Like it was freaky stuff, man.
What's interesting, on my YouTube channel, the show I do, The War Room, the original sound that was the start of the show was the vibration of Mars.
Oh wow.
Which Mars is the god of war, so I use because obviously like the frequency for Earth is Om, right?
Yeah.
But Mars has got a different tone. It's a much more deeper sound, and so I use that as like the kind of was the intro to the show.
That's cool, man.
I think I've ever said that to anybody, but that's where I got the sound.
That's really cool. When it's been difficult and the work ethics had to come through and you've had to push through physically, like what's the mindset that you've developed to do that? And is there like an inner voice that's that's driving you through those difficult sessions, difficult weeks, months, difficult weight cuts, all those kind of things?
I can't think of anything particularly that's like that I lean into. I mean, I always had such good support around me that part of me didn't want to let people down. That was always been a big motivator for me. I always waged war on doubt, right? I always had so many more people doubt me than people that believed in me. So that was what I waged war on. That was mine. I'm like, doubt me and I will prove you wrong. And that would drive me to do things that even I didn't think I was capable of doing. I remember, like, China was a big breakthrough for me, not for any other reason other than realizing my own strength. Like, I remember one of the punishments was Mabu, horse stance, and Shifu would shout, "Mabu down," and you would get down into Mabu, and then he would come over and he would put a bow staff across your hips, across your belt line, so you couldn't stand up, and then one across your arms here, so you couldn't drop your arms. And you hear a Mabu, right? And you're there, and there's like 2 or 3 of us because we're messing around or whatever. And I just remember that because I went out there so determined to prove myself to these monks because I held them in such high regard. I was not going to let them down and let myself down in their eyes. So there were certain times when I would push myself to a point where I wouldn't have been able to push myself on my own because they were there and I held them in such high regard, But I remember being in a stance in Mabu, and I remember my leg. I can't even describe the feeling because it had gone past burning to the point where they felt like they were frozen solid cold, and I didn't know whether I would be able to stand up if I wanted to, but I was there. And I was like, there was a point where like amazement took over and I'm like, I'm still standing up. I'm still standing up. And like the point where I expected myself to just collapse, I was just still there. So it was almost like I was observing myself, like having this realization that, oh, right, okay. It's like you're crossing a bridge and you realize the bridge is stronger than you anticipated. I was the bridge, I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm holding my own weight. And after that, I got a real boost in self-confidence, not from doing anything technically, but just from having that stubbornness to not physically quit when my body was ready to. That was a big turning point for me. I do remember that. That was probably the most powerful moment while I was in China, was just that realization that I can go way past what I thought I could. So therefore, I've always just kind of pushed that limit. Because like the limit that I thought I had when I went to China, when I got there after 2 weeks, that limit's now gone. I'm like, well, the limit I arrived with, it was a false illusion in my mind. So now I can just keep pushing to where is that limit, And I think that's part of the thing that's always driven me.
So then, you do the boat race, you do those things that make sense as to why you're going to do that. What now, though? You finished your physical, athletic career.
Maybe. Maybe. I don't know, to be honest. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what comes next. I'll be honest. I mean, I said this to you when you arrived. I was excited to have this conversation because I might wake up tomorrow feeling like I have a better idea of where I'm going, just purely from having this conversation with you guys. I don't know. I mean, my life does kind of move in cycles, and when one cycle comes to an end, it does start to feel like the new cycle's about to begin. And I remember feeling like that when my career with the UFC was coming to an end. I remember being out in Fight Island and saying to John Gooden, I think this is coming to an end. And it always stuck in my mind, that conversation, because I don't even know where it came from. It was like I said it and I heard myself say it, and I'm like, interesting. And now I can hear my brain saying the same thing again. And there's a new phase coming, and there's something else that I need to do. And I do feel like part of it is the scribblings on the walls. I do feel like I need to get a lot of this down on paper and put it into a system that I feel like I can leave behind, that doesn't need me around to explain it.
What is that scribbled on the wall? Like an intricate breakdown of fighting, or?
I mean, there's a gathering of stuff. There's some things that I've written down that I've heard other people say. Unfortunately, there's a lot of stuff that's been covered up as well by gloves and mirrors and that, because most of these walls have got scribblings on them. I mean, the stuff now, particularly on this wall, I've got a lot of combinations, and a lot of combinations that lead into the next one, and how they piece together. Because like I'm never trying to go, well, here's a combination, learn that combination, right? Good combination. Here's a combination, learn that combination. Good combination, next one. Because it's just an endless conveyor belt. What I'm trying to do with this is each one of my combinations will lead into the next one. There'll be a reason why it precursors the next one. They were the ones that we were working on last night, the ones on the floor there. Like, you start with a jab and a fast low kick, but then they build off the jab and the fast low kick, and then this technique here with the long hook, long low kick feeds off the middle pieces. So like, whenever Veronica and I are working, everything is about, okay, well, we've got these pieces and they're interchangeable with these pieces, and this makes sense because of this foundation that it's on. Foundation is almost always footwork. And then that is the list of techniques, kind of going back to discourse on method, right? Like, Descartes pulls everything apart to the very pieces, the threads, until you can't separate it anymore. And that's what I'm trying to do. Because just as an example, because this is the thing, is I started writing this, and I started with jab, lead jab, which is foundational hand strikes. It's the first one. And I wrote 22,000 words on it. And I realized that if I do this the way that it is in my mind, no one's ever going to read it. So my next challenge is probably to get that down in a way that's easy to transfer. Because in my mind, there's so much to it. Like I said, just a jab. Like, you go to a boxing gym and they'll teach you how to do a jab. But I can go to 10 boxing gyms and I can learn 10 different jabs. So that's not the same punch, is it? Right? Yeah. Like, what is it? Is it a stiff jab? Is it a snap jab? Is it a back fist jab? Right? Is it a stacked fist, like a Wing Chun punch? You know? Is it an open hand? Am I skirmishing with it? Do I even need to touch with it? You know, like, all of these different jabs. And then that's not even taking into account the footwork that comes with the jab, or the precursor, or the follow-up to it. You know, it's the complexity is endless.
Yeah, you can't have all of this and there not be something else. Can you have all of this wanting to come out of your head and not fight again? Like, is because, you know, there is an opportunity, I'm guessing, to continue to fight if you wanted to in different capacities now.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in a bit of an odd time, and I think we all are in MMA, because the old names still really resonate, right? And I'm one of the old names, so like, I get good offers for fights, but I'd be fighting another old guy. And, you know, the reality is that we should be watching the younger generations come through, because the 25, 26, 30-year-olds that are, you know, they started training when I was at the end of my career, they're killers now. And they're always going to be better than we were, because we didn't really have an idea what we were doing. Like, they've got at least some idea of what they're doing, because martial arts, MMA's been passed down and has been understood a bit better. But I don't know. I mean, a big part of me would like to fight because I just love the adrenaline rush of it. Like, there is nothing else like it, or at least not that I've experienced. But at the same time, I know that I would be disappointed because I won't move the way that I used to, right? So it's like, now I have the mindset to be able to communicate my skills much better, but not the physicality. Whereas when I had the physicality too, I didn't have the mindset necessarily. So, like, I guess really what I should be doing is preparing this information to pass it on to someone that can use it better.
I'll have to get a shot of you looking at that. Maybe just explain a little bit, because that would be really cool.
I mean, that's different. That's dealing with the different angles and gates on the human body. And this is where Wing Chun crosses over, because Wing Chun talks about inside and outside gates. And it's just like I'm digging into a lot of this stuff because again, like, you know, you look at old kung fu books and they didn't really know what they were trying to communicate. They didn't really know who they were communicating to and how best they could learn these skills. So in the old martial arts books, you have so many different variants of explanations, of diagrams, of, you know, understanding of a particular type of technique and how to apply it. And they're not all wrong, but they're not all right either. And I mean, I'll show you the books. Like, it's a case of sifting through loads and loads of it and going, that don't sound right. Like, old boxing books are fantastic. Particularly good for MMA because old boxing used smaller gloves, which changed the sport of boxing, right? If you look at any old photographs of any old boxers, right, they stand like this. They stand in positions where their head's away from their opponent, right? You see a boxer now and they're here, heads in the pocket because you can hide behind the gloves, right? So there was a point where, as the Queensberry rules were applied to boxing, and then rounds and gloves and all these things changed, it fundamentally changed the expression of the art. So if I can go back to those early days, I can have a better understanding of how boxing came from fighting as opposed to how boxing is now. Which again, I'm sorry, I'm just talking at you now.
No, I'm loving it.
Like, bare knuckle is another thing. Like, everyone does bare knuckle now, like they're wearing big gloves. Right? Where are the bare knuckle boxers? Where are the guys that can fight with no gloves on? Because they don't exist in bare knuckle right now. Right now, it's a macho contest of who's the toughest, who take the big punches, which is why Mike Perry's coming through, right? But in actuality, a bare knuckle boxer's, their lead hand goes back to what we were saying about the Scythians. The lead hand is the skirmisher, right? This is my defensive hand. This covers all my essential stuff, my nose, my mouth, my eyes, right? This is my skirmisher. And I'm not punching with those knuckles because I can do damage to my hand, right? But I would wrap them with the knuckles, which is why when you see bare knuckle boxers, they roll their fist differently, right? It's not a stacked fist like a boxer, right? It's rolled because they're exposing those knuckles. Yeah.
Where's the best place people can follow up from this conversation and hear more about? Do you speak about this kind of stuff on the podcast and stuff, or?
I don't really talk about it, but I have been thinking a lot more that I do need to open this dialogue up a bit more with people. So I'll probably look at doing some live streaming at some point this year and getting into it a bit more. I mean, you know, follow me online, Dan Hardy MMA. I'm on Instagram and Twitter for people who use Twitter anymore. And the YouTube channel is you can either search my name or Full Reptile, and that'll come up. And you know, there's loads. There's loads of content on there already. Loads of really, really good stuff that the Raptors did when they were out traveling around the world. Loads of analysis videos from the war rooms and stuff. And then we do the Picks podcast as well. So we'll be doing one this Sunday and then a war room as well. So there'll be a couple up next week and then the week after. But yeah, I'm always reachable.